Yeah, look at that.
Good morning, colleagues, and welcome to this morning's Cabinet meeting over in Pershore. Firstly, apologies and declarations of interest. I've got apologies from Mark Bayliss and also Richard Morris for today's meeting, and I'd just ask colleagues if there are any declarations of interest first in any item. No, none disclosed by anyone. Next, we move to public participation. I'd welcome Mr. Mackey this morning. Mr. Mackey, you wish to address the Cabinet. 3 minutes to cover off your public participation. Welcome.
It didn't seem like 5 minutes since I was sat here before, but that was on another subject. I wish to speak about the problems currently are being faced not only by the County Council, but by the Worcestershire Royal Hospital. And in particular, my question is that the Worcestershire Royal Hospital has for years since it opened in 2002 suffered from being built too small. This has resulted in insufficient beds to accommodate patient need. You will have all seen reports in the local paper over the years and more recently of the bed blocking in the main hospital wards, which has resulted in queues of ambulances waiting some up to 12 hours to discharge patients into the hospital to be treated on trolleys in corridors before beds become available. This is a perennial problem that can only be solved by the NHS building an annex, or, more particularly, taking over County Hall. Now surplus to requirements, I've just read. Surplus to requirements to convert the existing office spaces into accommodation for the hospital. Therefore, my questions are as follows. Will the Cabinet and County Council open talks with the local NHS Trust to examine the possibility of a takeover? Secondly, will the Cabinet confirm or deny that talks have taken place with the University of Worcester Vice-Chancellor in respect of the university taking ownership of County Hall to fill the 33.6 million gap in the council's finances? I shall stay to listen to this, which I've had a quick skim through, and I appreciate that what I'm suggesting couldn't happen tomorrow or even next year or the year after, but the problems at the hospital will continue. And as a public authority with an asset the size of County Hall, which can be repaired, I assume, eventually for occupation, it might be an idea to start the ball rolling, Mr. Leader, and invite the Worcestershire National Health Trust to come along here for a little round table chat as to whether or not they would be interested in taking over County Hall when it's fit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mackey, and thank you for taking the time this morning to come and address the Cabinet. And obviously, the item that you refer to is on the agenda, so we will be coming to the matter of County Hall after our first item in relation to the budget, but we very much welcome your contribution. So, yeah, microphone, yeah, there we are. The next item is for the confirmation of the minutes, and the minutes from the 16th of January, colleagues, and I just want to make sure people are happy for me to sign them as a true and accurate reflection of the meeting. Yeah, so I'll do that now. There we are. And then we'll move on to, it's a very busy Cabinet agenda this morning, and so I'll move the first item, which is in relation to the budget and medium-term financial plan. Now, on the 16th, we considered our draft budget proposals, which were out for consultation engagement, and today we're considering the budget proposals that will be recommended to the Council in this very building just in a week's time. And so firstly, colleagues, I will move the recommendations formally. So they're 1 little a through to H, and they're also recommendation 2A to D. which is on the second page of the agenda. What I will do is I'll set out for colleagues the background, which I did at the draft budget stage, but obviously we're now at the final proposed budget to Council. And the backdrop is the continuing pressures that the Council is facing, in common with the vast majority of upper tier authorities, those are county council and unitary authorities across the UK, in relation to rising cost and demand in our children's and adult social care, home to school transport and SEND provision. And that additional demand, and importantly cost, is growing, and it's growing faster than the income we're receiving, both through council tax and obviously through government grant, and therefore that's why the council is facing that gap in terms of the net expenditure. And I've got to be honest with colleagues that the government settlement that is now being finalised, we received the final government settlement, is deeply disappointing because it's woefully inadequate to address the pressures that the council, this council and many other councils of all political persuasions across the UK face. Because those pressures are not pressures that are unique to Worcestershire, they're pressures faced up and down the country. And what we have to do is discharge legislation to a statutory standard, and we're inspected and regulated, and rightly so. But those cases that come forward for social care, where we have to take a child into care, or whether we have to provide a package of care for somebody, maybe working age, or maybe an older person, those aren't things that are within the council's discretion. They're duties, and we must discharge them. And we do so rightfully and properly on behalf of the government. But ultimately, in doing so, that is creating huge financial pressures. And to add to that, the government in their budget decided that they were going to make major changes to national insurance contribution, both the rate and the threshold, and of course national living wage. And whilst we all welcome the opportunity for people to be paid more, ultimately small businesses and many other organisations are facing a huge rise in their national insurance costs. And these costs, whilst being reimbursed to the council's directly employed staff, are not covered in the government's grant. And even in the final settlement, no allowance is made for the kind of costs that are going to hit our suppliers. And we believe that's quite a significant impact. And obviously businesses and charities across the county and across the nation are going to be hit with those costs. But they're not being reimbursed, and we're having to make some provision in our budget for those costs, but nowhere near the kind of costs that suppliers will be facing. So whilst income is going up, it's not keeping pace with demand or pressures, and it's leaving it at this final stage in recommending to Council a gap of some £33 million, which obviously, faced with that pressure and knowing the circumstance, in common with other councils, we have requested exceptional financial support, and we've yet to hear about that request. The government did publish ones in relation to council tax precepts, where councils were requesting a higher council tax than that permitted without a referendum. Just to make it clear, we didn't put in such a request. We weren't requesting council tax go above 5%, and therefore we didn't get any feedback from government because we had no such request. Ours is for capitalisation order, and that is to allow us to capitalise some of our day-to-day expenditure whilst we develop the plan in terms of living within our means and lobbying government, along with many other colleagues through the CCN, to address those core demand pressures. So we need reform to services, reform to the legislation that services are set up, as well as additional funding. Both are required. And again, that is lacking from this government. They are not grasping the nettle in relation to some of those pressures. We can see in adult social care where the can is being kicked down the road. Whilst there's going to be a review, it's not going to come in anytime soon. We're not seeing the changes that's required in terms of SEND legislation, and yet we have to provide that provision. And we're not seeing some of those other pressures that government are creating in national insurance that I described funded. And it's important the government addresses those to enable councils, upper tier and unitary councils, to be sustainable, whatever their size in the future. And so we set those out, and today we're able to also report on the feedback as a result of the consultation of the budget from OSPB, and you'll see in your additional papers some very well thought out remarks from OSPB and their panels. We had a very good session in Kidderminster where we went through that for some 2 hours, myself and the Chief Exec and the Chief Finance Officer, answering questions on the budget, a very sensible debate about some of those pressures. And our scrutiny colleagues have fed back, and we welcome those comments. We've also done engagement with the business community, our staff, in terms of briefing them, our union colleagues, which the Chief Exec engaged with, and also with the VCS, the voluntary community sector, in terms of the pressures that we've faced. And importantly today, we're able to update in relation to our capital programme. And I'll just say a few words in relation to the capital programme. It's important, I believe, that the council does more than provide statutory services as statutory minimum. That isn't a council, that's an agency function of national government if the council got into that situation. And so it's important we can continue to do the things that the public rightly expect in terms of growing the economy, protecting the environment, improving our infrastructure, delivering those important investments. And I'll draw out a couple of them for colleagues around the table. We are looking to make significant investments as part of our capital programme, working with schools to make sure that children with SEND and specialist provision can be accommodated where it's in their interest through their EHCP in local provision. I think that's incredibly important. Obviously, that does take a lot of work in terms of those schools, but there is a link to obviously trying to address some of the pressures in terms of homeschool transport. And that's a good example of where the council is taking positive action in its capital programme to set aside resources to work with the sector to try and make sure that the local provision that's enabled in schools can meet some SEND requirements, thereby negating the need to travel long distances, better for the child, better for the local school that in terms of the mixture of children they have, but also better for our budget. And that's been enabled through the capital programme. We're also making sure that we can continue to resurface roads and pavements and maintain the county's infrastructure, which is a long-term asset, and we don't want it to become a long-term liability for taxpayers, in a good condition. The council's got an excellent track record over many years of maintaining its roads and pavements and highway network to a very good standard. You can see that when you go around the country. You can see that's really important for vulnerable road users as well, like cyclists and pedestrians, that we keep the network in a good condition. So there is an ambitious programme of investments there. That is prudent and it's sensible to do because actually it will make sure that we've got that plan to address some of the long-term pressures we're facing in, as I said, homeschool transport and school provision. In terms of schools, we're continuing to invest in our schools. That's really important, obviously, as a growing economy, more homes, more people in the county, that we have the relevant provision. But we also need to look, colleagues, and this links to the capitalisation order, and it links to the county hall that we've just heard about, at our buildings and assets. And so I explained to OSPB, and again set out today, that we will be examining as a prudent authority all the assets and buildings that we have to make sure they're fit for purpose, they're required in terms of our operational need, and we'll be mindful of the shift that's been announced and reinforced yesterday in a statement from government that all 2-2 areas will be moving to unitary councils, and therefore we'll be looking at that in the context of what public estate and assets, buildings, depots, etc. will be required in the future. And if that will relieve some of the need to own so many buildings and assets, that's obviously a clear way of being able to pay down some of any borrowing we need through exceptional financial support and being able to balance the books, as well as obviously starting to develop a transformation and reform programme in the context, colleagues, of the changes that are going to happen in local government. And so I'm happy to move the recommendations on the final budget and medium-term plan with those remarks to Council, recommending a 4.99% council tax. That will leave the County Council as one of the lowest council tax levels of any county council in the country. So we'll still be delivering value for money. We'll still be only asking people to pay the absolute minimum to make sure the services can be provided. And I don't make an apology for that because I know that people are hard pressed. And with all the pressures they're facing, that we should be mindful of the costs that are falling on them, and we should always seek to be as efficient and effective with public resources as possible. But that's an aspect that we'll be debating in this very room in a week's time, where obviously we'll hear alternative views, and it will be for all members, remember, to set the budget. These are only our recommendations, colleagues, today. So with those quite extensive, much more extensive remarks than I probably expected to say, I would invite Marcus as the Deputy Leader to second the budget and medium-term financial plan.
Thank you very much indeed, Leader. Good morning. And yes, before I do anything else, I will formally second the recommendations as set out on page 1 of the agenda, 1 little a to H, and then also on page 2 little a to D. I echo all of the comments that you have made, and it's absolutely right that we are in a very challenging position, because we live in very challenging times as an upper tier authority that has to wrestle with increasing demand in our frontline services, whether that be children's or adult social care, whether it be SEND, whether it be home to school transport. And of course, whilst it's never a race to the bottom, we are in good company, because we have exactly the same pressures that whether you're a unitary or a county council area have exactly the same pressures. And of course, the quantum of cash that we receive from government is not sufficient to tackle those pressures. But one thing that is absolutely certain is that we're not going bankrupt. And what is also absolutely certain is that we will take the necessary measures and steps to ensure that we have sound financial management for this council that we have always done. The figure in 1A, and I haven't dusted back my agendas from 20 years from when I first came on this council, but 495 million is a net revenue budget. I thought last year's, I think at 438 was pretty high, and certainly under when we had the austerity measures back in 2010, we were down to net revenue budgets of 300 million, and here we are. This is the biggest net revenue budget I can remember, and it just goes to demonstrate the cash allocation that we need to continue to pour into those really important services to ensure that we protect the vulnerable. And it's worth saying that our services are not failing. We provide good services for our residents. Children's social care is just one of those. It would be absolutely right to say 6 or 7 years ago our children's services were failing, but absolutely not now. And it's right that we allocate cash to protect the vulnerable, but a message that I always do highlight is we have tough choices to make, because it's really important that we remember that we have a population of 600,000 residents across the length and breadth of this beautiful county, from urban to rural, and we need to provide services for all, ensuring that our 21 libraries remain open, ensuring that we support all modes of transport at the detriment of none. Resurfacing roads is really important, whether you're a cyclist, a pedestrian, drive a car, travel in a bus, in a commercial van, or even on a horse. Good roads are important, and so are good pavements. And we have a proven track record in investing in the things that are really important to our local communities. Council tax, one never likes to put up council tax, but it's absolutely right again that we put up our council tax by 2.99%, and we take the opportunity to utilise the adult social care precept and obviously ring fence that for adult social care services, because of course we have big demands on adult social care of effectively working age service users, which is absolutely great, as we are able to champion independence, and people with learning disabilities and physical disabilities are living much longer and living much more fulfilled lives, and that's really important that we allocate the resource to do so. But of course, we have increased national insurance costs, increased fuel, increased national living wage, and all of these pressures on the providers whom we buy the package of cares from, of course, add to our costs. And that is something that, you know, we have to tackle and be cognizant of. Good to see that our council tax base is growing, I think, by about £4.5 million this year, and our council tax income as a result of these increases set out in One Little E will yield, I think, about 15-16 million to get us to an overall total of 21 million when you add in the increase in the tax base. But I think it's finally, without wishing to sound like a broken record, paragraph 52 on page 12 is the one that jumps out for me. Looking forward, 25-26, facing an additional £77 million of investment in pressures, pay, non-pay inflation, the use of reserves from 24-25, £15 million of recurrent pressures, bringing the total additional investment of over £100 million. And there it is again, demand for services continues to increase across adults and children's social care, as well as home to school transport. And these pressures are not going away. With that, Leader, I shall stop and commend this administration's budget for consideration on the 13th of February at full council.
Thank you, Marcus. So it's been moved and seconded. I don't know whether I want to bring any other Cabinet colleagues first or any other contributors. I don't know whether, Matt, you want to make... Yeah, Matt.
Thank you, Simon. Yeah, and I'll probably ask some of these questions like before. I'll try and vary it a bit. Probably following on from what Marcus just said about looking back to, you know, budgets from like 10 odd years ago. I certainly remember my first budget, 2014. My issue is that followed about 3 years where we didn't raise our council tax at all. You know, 3 years where we had the zero. And I think my question really is, obviously, and 2014 we made lots of cuts to services. I mean, I lost the park and ride that is near my division, and lots of other cuts to bus services, etc. There were lots of cuts during that period. So I think it's a fundamental question around, you know, whether you now regret looking back that kind of ultimate aim almost of having the lowest council tax, or one of the lowest council taxes in the country, means that we are now less able to face these clear pressures that we're facing, because even if we do, as we're doing, raising council tax the full amount, because our council tax base is much lower than the average, it means we will struggle to fill that gap. So that would be first question, and then just a more specific one around the choice of capitalisation rather than the increase in council tax that some others did. I know that some achieved it and some didn't get it from the government. Wondering, just a question around kind of your thought process around why you chose capitalisation rather than a slight tax increase above the 5%. Thank you.
Because I'm happy to and I'd love this genuine debate, because it is a debate, and it's a debate for many members of the public to have as well. And Phil might want to make a contribution, but the demands and pressures that we're seeing now, I don't think anyone could envisage the pressures that we're seeing in SEND. So just to spell them out, there's a £44 million overspend at the current time, which will make our DSG high needs deficit nearly £90 million. I don't think 10 years ago, when the legislation came about, that anyone would envisage that councils across the UK would be facing some £5 billion worth of deficits that were held off balance sheet by a statutory direction. I don't think any politician would have envisaged that. And in fact, I think if national politicians had realised the impact of the legislation and the demands it would place on the sector, they may well have made different decisions. And I don't think it's for local taxpayers to pick up the bill. plain blunt. I think if the government decides to put in new legislation that puts legislative requirements and it inspects it through Ofsted and CQC, and it requires us to deliver on behalf of the nation, I think it is for the nation to provide the resources, not hard-pressed local taxpayers through additional taxation locally, because these aren't discretionary services. And so I would say if the government makes requirements and regulates them and sets them, they should be provided through national taxation, because they're decisions made by the national government which we are discharging locally. On services, I think we've actually got, and we may disagree, but a proud track record of protecting lots of services in Worcestershire. There are councils that have shut libraries, that have reduced provision all over the shop. They've had to do that not because of a genuine will or wish to do it, but because of the financial challenges that we've faced. But actually we have been able to reform. We've got a record reform programme this current year, with which we're delivering 75% of some £37 million worth of savings and efficiencies. And I think through the unitarisation process that's going to happen, and we're going to be compelled to partake in, there will be a fresh look at how services are delivered in a more efficient, effective way across Worcestershire. And ultimately, that will mean that there are assets and resources that are freed up. And it is with that in mind that we chose the capitalisation order route. Because I do think it's right to look at our buildings and assets and see what the provision and footprint is for those, first and foremost, before asking people to pay more. So if we can liberate some of those assets and we can actually use our buildings and capital resources more effectively and efficiently, that must be right before asking the taxpayers to dip into their pocket for even more money. And we know how hard-pressed people are in terms of the pressures on their family budgets. And I don't want to request the government to see even more of that pressure put on the backs of potentially some of the poorest people in society, because council tax is not a very progressive tax, I would suggest. And so there are very many people who are working, but just about managing, and also have to pay that council tax. And that's why we've chosen the capitalisation route. So I do think council tax should be, if it's going to be raised, for those genuine issues where the council is varying services. And then you can have a general debate. You can say, higher council tax to deliver a better service in locality, we're able to provide these extra things. That's not the case at the moment. Council tax is being used to subsidise national pressures and national laws. And I don't think that's right. It doesn't feel like local government. It feels like local administration. And that might be something that actually we quite agree on, in terms of we want genuine local government with genuine ability to raise resources to put into local variations, not simply discharging national pressures. And that's why we are putting out the capitalisation order we've applied for, and also setting out the use of capital resources for that process. I hope I've just provided what I think is, as full of explanation of my thought pattern, Matt, in relation to what I know is a genuine question. But I'll bring in the Chief Finance Officer, Phil, as well. Phil.
Thank you all. Morning, everybody. I'll just touch on a bit on the process on exceptional financial support. So when we've had conversations with the government were clear, MHCLG, that excessive increases in council tax would be very, very minimum. And on Monday, there was only 6 councils that got extra support. So ministers would be look dimly on effectively council taxes above the 4.99%. So they've took a really strict approach to that. So hence why there's no point applying for some. I won't name all the councils. There's another council that did apply for exceptional financial support, not for capitalisation, but for council tax. They were refused in terms of that. So the process that we had to do is the right process, in my opinion, my professional opinion, and we had to do that. So that's why I wrote to MHCLG and started that process in December, because we knew what we had from the provisional settlement. So we are where we are. There are other councils in this position. There are others that have not come out publicly to say that, but obviously in conversations with the Chief Executive SITFA and the LGA and CCN, we're doing the right things. It's just the excessive increases in spend that we have that's going to capture the whole of the local government sector. So we're doing the right things, and this is where we are, and we'll wait to hear from the government, and it probably will be at the end of February, so it's going to be a tight process to do that, but that was announced in the settlement on Monday.
I think they're very wise words, Phil, because can you just imagine if this council had put in a request to put up council tax and the government had encouraged that and then it had turned it down? It might be like another process which the government encourages us to partake in, which has not been honestly handled, I don't think, by the government. So I would just say that I'm glad that we didn't go down that pathway. And as Phil has set out, those councils that did, and they genuinely felt they needed that additional pressure, have not been agreed to. Many of those rises have not been agreed to.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the point of why we've gone for capitalisation as well. Capitalisation effectively is like agreeing an overdraft with the government.
Yeah.
And the point really that's really important for me there, and certainly for Phil and I, is we don't have to draw it down. So all we're really asking for is the approval to use it if we need to. Whereas if you charge council tax, it's a definitive thing. You charge it and you get the money in. And so if we can save money and we can bring plans forward quicker, or there is a downturn in demand, you know, historically demand wasn't at this level. It has been since the end of the COVID pandemic that demand has really taken off and costs have taken off. If there was to be a reduction in that, so we're trying to, wherever possible, protect the taxpayer by saying we will take a limited approach to what additionality we need, and so capitalisation is a better route, because although you might apply for, you know, £10 million worth, if you only need to use 3 million of it, great. And that's what we will be focusing on, being able to keep as low as we possibly can. But if the demand continues, and remember these are not discretionary services, we have to provide these services. And so even though we talk about overspend, really it is demand spend. It's not that we've got control, because we have to respond to what comes through the door. If they continue, we will be in a position where the council can meet those costs. If we can get a reduction in that, or if we can turn down our costs in terms of other ways of saving, then we won't need to draw down the full capitalisation, which will be better long-term for the council and better long-term for the taxpayer.
And that's a really good, another excellent point, because of course, let's remember, colleagues, what we do in setting a budget. We set a forecast for expenditure. And so we're making provision in this for quite large increases actually in the costs of children and adults and homeschool travel, continuing rises. And if they do materialise as we expect them to, then of course those resources would be required. But I would draw members' attention to, obviously, we're going to continue to try and work to bring, wherever possible, those costs or demand within a more affordable framework. And so if we're successful in that, as the Chief Executive has laid out, then we wouldn't have to draw down so much support, and we wouldn't be requiring so much additional finances. And that must be right and proper, because the budget is climbing at an exceptional rate. And that without significant additional government resources is going to make that difficult to manage in the medium term. So I'm also hopeful that some of the reform measures that we're starting to work on in terms of trying to work with the sector to accommodate more children in local schools where possible will have an effect, particularly on the homeschool travel budget. Now, whether it can actually come down, I think is a real difficult point. But certainly it might arrest the incline in resources. The final point I make is around fostering. And again, I don't apologise for making this point. We want to encourage more people to come forward and support them to do so, to provide loving homes for very vulnerable children that we've had to take into care. And that's better, much better for the child, it's better for their outcome, and it's certainly a more affordable and better use of public resources. And so that is a long-term project. It doesn't have instant success, because obviously you have to go out, you have to make people aware, you have to motivate them to come forward, you have to support them through that very long process, because we can only have the right and proper people that meet all the safeguarding, etc. criteria. But that's a really forward-looking and ambitious campaign that we're leading there. It is something I think nationally needs to be done as well, because it's so important to provide vulnerable homes for very vulnerable children. And so ultimately, if that is successful, we know that that can mean that some of the very steep rises in children's placements might be able to be ameliorated. And again, that's something that we're working on, I know, actually across Cabinet and with officers and indeed with the CCM. So all those reform programmes, we don't know exactly where they will land. So you have to make this forecast based on demand, as the Chief was saying. But if we can make a change to any of those things, a small shift on the dial can make a big change in terms of the bottom line. And so, again, capitalisation is the right way. I'm very conscious, colleagues, that I've got a range of speakers that are looking at me, wanting their turn. So I shall reserve any further comments, and I'll bring in Alistair, because Alistair's been waiting to come in as well. Did you indicate? No? Okay. Right, I've got Adam. I'm going to sweep round from right to left.
Thank you, Leader. I think it's really interesting, isn't it? Because residents see headlines, but really, what do my residents talk to me about? They talk to me about roads. They talk to me about pavements. And as they border Birmingham, they see a stark contrast between the quality of our roads and pavements and the quality of the roads and pavements in my neighbouring area. They talk about buses. The expansion of the Worcestershire on-demand bus service has been absolutely phenomenal for the residents of Bromsgrove and that area. One of the biggest problems I had with those was they're saying there's no bus stop in the area that I can use, and that's because that area never had a bus. So on the services that the residents see, we've continued to deliver over the last few years. I think the issue that we face, and that every council faces, is the huge unremitting demand for services for the minority of our residents that seek them in adults, children's and home to school transport. And the governments have failed continually to provide the proper funding and the proper reform for those areas to stop all of these councils getting into financial difficulty. We're not alone with this. I mean, and we're in a position, I think, really, and I'll come on to what's happening in my neighbouring area. We're in a position whereby you've got a system that's completely broken. It's as simple as that. There's 1 in 100 children in care in the UK. There's a complete absence of foster carers. It's very difficult for them to get through the process. Something has to be done. We keep talking about it all the time, and in a sense, we've been waiting for government to deliver a solution. And it's great to see ourselves working with other cabinet members that we're starting to put these things into place straight away, because we can't wait for people to come back to us with a solution to this. But some reform has got to be done, and somebody's got to do it. And they've kicked that down the road. So we've got a situation where they've got a chaos around unitaries and what's going on, complete confusion for councils, burdening us with even more red tape and bureaucracy to try and find our way through these processes, when the biggest problem that's facing us with children's SEND and adults and home to school transport has just been kicked down the road. So that's deeply concerning. In terms of our financial position, I think we've got something like 70 million in reserves, haven't we? Some of our neighbouring authorities have got 1.5 million. And I noticed the Chief Executive's comments about sort of, it's there if we need it. And that's the key point. We have got that 70 million. It's there if we need it. We're being prudent. We're being sensible. I mean, I'll draw your attention to the headline on ITV yesterday about Birmingham. Adult social care and child services to bear brunt of bankrupt Birmingham Council's 148 million cuts. Now, this is a Labour-run authority that's put the council tax up next to my residents by 10%, and wanted to do another 10% this year. I mean, I fear for their residents, I really do. They were even told by their own government, because they're Labour-run, they're told by the Labour government, you can't do that, we're only going to let you do 7.5%. So you can see the situation that we're in. And what they're doing to their services compared to what we're doing is quite stark. In total, 148 million will be cut. Adult social care, 43 million. How could we cut adult social care at the moment? It's going up, not down. That's going to be an absolute decrease of services for the people that live next to me. Children and families, 39 million in cuts. And the rest of it as well, corporate place, prosperity, and that's a council tax rise of 7.5%. So I get really annoyed when I see headlines that say, oh, the council's bankrupt. We have got a fundamental national problem in this country that is not being addressed, and it needs to be addressed now. How can you ask us to provide these services that are increasing by far more than we're allowed to increase council tax? And I don't want to increase council tax for our residents. How can you balance the books? It's absolutely ridiculous. You're allowed to put council tax up by 5%, but your cost base is going up by exponentially more than that. It's madness. The economies of madness. The government needs to get a grip for it. I think, I've been a councillor now since 2017. These are the most difficult times in the senior management to be able to understand what you're doing because your hands are effectively tied behind your back. So the message from today is, please, can more residents come forward for fostering so that we can actually deal with the problem that we've been dealt. But for Christ's sake, can the government actually get a grip on the things that really matter to councils across the UK and deliver proper reform in this area? And if they're not going to do that, at least get the funding right.
Yeah, I'd absolutely echo that message because that's, in a nutshell, and in a much more concise way, what I'm saying. I'd absolutely agree. Well, I shall keep going in terms of the contributors that might wish to speak, and I'll come back to Tony as well. So, David, did you want to say anything, or Steve at this stage? Yeah. Steve.
Yeah, only that to repeat exactly what Councillor Kent has said, this is a social enterprise that this country is facing at the moment. We've got to recruit more foster carers. There's no other way forward. The more savings we make, the more discretionary services we can supply to the public. That's what they want. That's exactly what they want. But we can't do it without their help. And, of course, that extra funding from government, which is, well, it just goes without saying now.
And I'll bring in Karen. I absolutely agree, Steve, and that's why we've been on the front foot, and we are on the front foot again in terms of looking at working with schools. It's not something the government's doing, it's something we're leading locally, but ultimately we need the government to get on board, and we need the national government to get a grip, as Adam was saying, of some of these issues, and implement the changes required, or they're going to have to put substantial resources forward. I won't take up any more of everyone's time about SEND, but I've made the point about that overspend and that deficit, nearly £90 million. Karen.
Thank you very much, Leader, and good morning, Cabinet. Good morning, everyone. We're in a really difficult position here with the increase in spend linked to the increase in demand. But fundamentally at the centre of this is the vulnerable in our communities. And I feel very passionate, as do colleagues on this Cabinet, about how we protect these. With the cut in winter fuel allowances in my own personal area, I'm seeing a large number of people at community gathering spaces making use of the warm space because to heat their own homes is very difficult and very expensive in many instances. I think many governments forget that pensioners tend to be very asset strong, where they are asset strong, cash poor. And it's a culmination, and just to keep looking to the taxpayers to say, right, we're going to put the council tax up, which is a question that Councillor Jenkins asked about the capitalisation, is very difficult at a time when rising costs are still happening and the demand is still in the system. So I, for one, will be supporting this budget. I think it's very important that we do look after those vulnerabilities and keep our warm spaces open, i.e. our libraries, which are very well utilised across the whole of the county. I also, at this point, want to just thank the parish councillors that came on the consultation with the Chief Finance Officer and myself the other evening. They were really engaged and asking some really pertinent questions about how we've got to here. But we're not unique in this. I don't think there's a county council out there in this country that currently doesn't face the challenges, or a unitary authority where they have adult social care, home to schools transport, that doesn't face the same, and special educational needs. All of them are really important needs that need to be addressed. But when you have a budget, you have a finite amount of resource, and it isn't endless. And as I say, vulnerability is at the front end. I see it on a daily basis. We're very lucky in this country as a whole, but to look after the people that aren't so lucky is really important, really, really important. So I will be supporting the budget, but I just hope at some stage, like others have said, there's a root and branch revision of how the public sector is financed. Thank you.
Absolutely echo your message, particularly at the core of protecting the most vulnerable in society and the difficulties that people are having with all the changes in such a short space of time. By gum, farmers have been in this chamber expressing, their heartfelt pleas about what's happening to them. Pensioners in terms of winter fuel. We've got businesses now really suffering in terms of NI. This is just 6 months into a new government. It's a really worrying time for people. David.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, I wanted to, first of all, thank Adam for eloquently articulating all the issues that this council and councils across the nation are facing in terms of the financial pressures due to adult social care, children's services, etc., etc. And I also wanted to pick up on a point excuse me, that the Chief noted, which is, well, these aren't overspends, Leader. These are demand-led spends. I mean, it's a very important distinction because overspends implies that we're being frivolous and profligate with money, and we're not. We are a very prudent council. Hence, our council tax has been amongst the lowest for many years, and a record we should be proud of. Government policy mandates that we provide certain services. And we have to provide those despite the fact that the funding has never lived up to the demand for them. And I just want to touch on briefly one minor point which people have mentioned, national insurance contributions. At another council where I hold the finance portfolio, we have extra costs of £300,000. Now, we were led to believe by government that we were going to be fully reimbursed for those costs. We're £200,000 short in that. So we're getting £90,000 against £300,000 in increased costs. So the government really needs, when it starts thinking about policy changes, to think about the ramifications it has on local authorities. And I shall be supporting this budget. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, David. As you said, tremendous impact in terms of national insurance, and we're hearing that from the voluntary sector in particular. Obviously, they operate on very, well, they're not margins, are they? They're delivering services on our behalf and on behalf of all sorts of councils or the nation. And they're the voluntary sector. Can't believe a Labour government's hitting them, but astonishing. Emma.
Yes, thank you, Leader, and thank you to Cabinet for expressing all of the views that I actually agree with, and I will actually be supporting this budget. But what I'd like to sort of think about is if I were to take this report to my economic tutor, he would tell me you've got two decisions to make. You can cut your demand or you can increase your costs. And we can't cut demand because that is why I was elected, and that is why everyone in this room is elected, is to look after the vulnerable. And that's what we must continue to do. There is no dispute on that. What we can't do is burden the wrong taxpayer. We must actually extract the taxation from the proper mechanism, which, as you clearly pointed out, is a national, because it is a national conundrum. And I can actually see my economic tutor, who was a Labour person, actually saying, this doesn't fit, Emma, make it work. And that's exactly where we are. So I will actually be supporting this budget, and I will actually be looking to support all the other schemes that this council does actually manage to achieve, the likes of the road, the pavements for all our other residents. And I'm personally, waving the flag for the flood defences and the localised flood schemes, as you would expect me to do so, because that is so important to our residents in so many areas. You may just think it belongs to the people on the rivers. No, you have flooding issues in many towns, in many communities for 2 or 3 houses, and we as the local authority should be absolutely, as the lead local flood authority, should be supporting our communities and getting national taxation to pay for the statutory duties that we are required to deliver. Thank you.
And I'd absolutely echo those points, and that's why the capital programme again makes a significant increase from previous capital programmes to make sure we can address some of the issues with our drainage, highway drainage, because actually flash flooding events are becoming more frequent. The climate is changing, and we can see that in terms of the intensity of rainfall, and we're getting flooding events in areas which are not at all linked to rivers or streams, and ultimately we need to make sure the network can cope with those extreme weather events better, and we can make sure we're not just dealing with the revenue implications of drainage, the jetting, but when those jetters discover a problem with whether it's roots or whether it's a blockage or it's a broken gully connection, we can actually address that. So we need to make sure we put in more resources, and this budget does that, as you said, Emma, investing in making sure we're getting the infrastructure for the future. I'm conscious of time as well, colleagues, but I've got Tony. I'll bring in Tony.
Thank you, Leader. And thank you. And most of my questions have been answered by the Cabinet. And it's nice to see that the unity in the Cabinet and Cabinet are all realising the pressures that are and the demands that are being put on our residents. But there is a thank you from our residents that we are looking at how we can actually charge our residents and increase council tax to cover our demands. And they're very much appreciative that we're not going to the extreme. The parish councils that I go to are very concerned about the finances and about the percentage that is spent on looked after children, even though they know it's necessary to do this. But what I would ask is, would it be possible for our comms department to send out to our parish councils what the pressures are, and because the parish councils need to know, and not all parish councils get this information, because we don't all the time visit our parish councils. I do go to all 12 of mine, but it doesn't happen all the time, and so parish councils are not given the information which they need, which they can put out in their parish magazines to their residents. So I think that it is an important communication side. And I would also ask, with the percentage of the population getting older, how much out of kilter are we not tracking our finances to deal with the forthcoming problem of the ageing population? And there must be a percentage there which we would have calculated, but we haven't got that in front of us. And but a big thank you to the Cabinet and to yourself and the officers for caring for our community.
Thanks, Tony. And I think you make an excellent point in terms of we have so many people involved in parish councils, parish and town councils, that sort of heartbeat of the community, and actually making sure they're aware of some of those pressure points and where large amounts of taxpayers' money is spent is eminently sensible. And no Joe's at the back of the room, so that's the kind of information we can help get out there. I think in terms of the demand-led pressures, there's well over 72% that's now spent on social care, children's and adult social care, and children's services. So, you know, that's been climbing. I think if I look back to the old corporate plan, which is a few years ago, because we tend to develop them every 4 or 5 years, some under 60%, and we were trying to keep it at 60%. Well, we're well above 70% now. So that just shows you, just in a short space of time, just how those pressures are climbing. And ultimately that makes delivering all the other things our communities rightly expect from the council even more difficult. The interesting thing is also, in terms of adult social care colleagues, that more and more resources are spent on working age disability and lifelong conditions. They've been climbing. So it isn't just people as they age needing that additional support to stay in their homes and stay happy and healthy and independent, through domiciliary care or helping people with those small aids and adaptations. A lot more of the money is actually spent on the working age. I don't know whether, Mark, we've been very involved with some of the Newton Europe work. I don't know whether you want to exemplify that point, because I know you and other colleagues on some of the national working.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Thank you for the opportunity. You're quite right. In terms of the County Council Network, did commission a piece of work with Newton Europe that we've been fully involved with, both from a financial position. Phil's been part of that work, as I have as well, in terms of service delivery. And yes, it absolutely points to the fact, for those authorities that were involved in the work, that the populations in adults working age is probably around about 40% in terms of the population. But actually, in terms of spend and cost, it's somewhere in the region of 60 to 65% of the budget, really. So while traditionally we always point to an ageing population as being the driver for increased costs, in many ways now it's actually adults of working age that as the main driver, really, in terms of relatively at times costly packages of care. So it's absolutely, as you say, Simon, that's a big driver. I guess I would just maybe make one other point, though. What we are trying to do, Worcestershire, is to try and turn some of that around. We've been successful in terms of a Department of Work and Pensions initiative in terms of getting people with specific needs across a population back into employment, and that's going to be a big focus for us for the future in terms of how we turn things around, really, for that population.
Thanks, Mark. And I think it helps to bring some professional colleagues around the table in terms of the work they do each and every day, which I'm always very grateful of. Can we agree this? Obviously, we're going to be meeting just a week's time. We're only making recommendations to Council, but we've had a good summary debate this morning. Can we agree this to go to Council in a week's time? Okay, and we'll move to our next important item, which is County Hall, and I'll invite Marcus Hart as the relevant Cabinet member to introduce the report.
Thank you very much indeed, Leader, and it gives me great pleasure to be able to present this report and bring Cabinet and the wider members and indeed the public up to speed as to exactly where we are, as there is always seems to be much gossip, speculation and rumour flying around the county as to what we might or might not be doing with this building and indeed whom we might or might not have talked to. So let me first of all move the recommendations 1 little a to F on page 41 of the agenda. And this is the next stage of the process because, of course, colleagues will recall that in July of last year, this Cabinet took a decision to allocate a quantum of cash up to £375,000 and potentially a further £1.5 million if we could fix the problem. Now, of course, predominantly the issues around County Hall have stemmed from the rack issue, reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete, as is set out. If you'll forgive the pun, someone only this morning accused us of allowing County Hall to go to rack and ruin. Well, perhaps they were half right, but of course that was not a problem of our own making. County Hall, which planning consent in fact was granted, as I understand it, in 1974, and then construction took place there over in 1975, and the building was opened operationally in 1976, was built at a time which is far removed from the modern world that we live and work in today. County Hall has, of course, served us very well over the years. But, of course, that is no longer, and nothing stays the same forever. What we are effectively saying is that moving forwards, this will not be our HQ, and that this building is now surplus to requirements. And arguably, the timing is, of course, fortuitous because one thing that the Minister did do when they wrote to the leader of the County Council and the 6 district leaders across the county is that we are having local government reorganisation. Our County Council and 6 district councils are going to be abolished in the lifetime of this Parliament. And of course, I think that demonstrates, in terms of our decision making today as a county council, that actually you don't need a building, and I've sat on this council for nearly 20 years this May, and we have often been accused over the years of, people in County Hall, they sit in an ivory tower, they're completely removed from local communities. I mean, what they think about elected members who represent those communities and the majority of the staff that live in those communities, I know not. But that, of course, is the accusation that is made. And actually, this is making a clear statement of intent that, councils and organisations, whether it's a county council or a unitary council, are far more than just a building. Actually, this is a great opportunity for us to utilise the capacity across the public estate in Worcestershire. to utilise the local government family. I'm not biased or blinkered in any way, but White Forest District Council, for example, have an excellent building that still looks shiny and new, even though that it's 12 years old. And here we are, just to show that I'm not biased, in Wychavon, in Pershore, and obviously. We're in this council chamber, and so what we've been able to do is get out and about across the county and use the buildings, which shows that we're embedded across Worcestershire. I don't believe, and of course it will be matters for a new council post-May, because as little F says, we're requesting the bringing back of a report to Cabinet excuse me, in Q1 of 25-26 to cover the proposals for the site. I don't certainly propose building a new county hall or unitary hall. I frankly think there is enough capacity within the public estate across Worcestershire, particularly as we know that we're going to have a unitary authority. So this is the starting of the firing gun. And as the report highlights, paragraph 45 sets out the options. And of course, there are a number of options. And just so that, we can be perfectly clear, I anticipate that this site will be brought to market. We aren't the local planning authority. The site sits within Worcester City Council. I am sure there are a plethora and smorgasbord of organisations, legal entities, whether that be the acute hospital trust, whether that be the university, whether that be a private sector developer, or anybody else who might wish to acquire the site. Indeed, I am sure in due course that anybody will have the opportunity to acquire it on the open market. And if they decide to demolish it, then that will be a matter for them. If they decide to invest what will be millions of pounds to bring this building up to standard and deal with the rack, then again, that will be a matter for them, all subject to planning, because as can be demonstrated by table 1 on page 45 of the agenda, it would be a gross waste of taxpayers' money to try and bring this building up to standard and fit for the purpose for the modern age. £15 million, which would immediately have to be spent to deal with the rack issue, and another £3.4 million to deal with essential works to get the building safe for occupation. That's, £18 million straight away. And you can see the total investment required between now and over the next decade will be some £36 million worth of works, building condition works, mechanical and electrical works, etc., etc. And we don't believe that is value for money, and we now believe that is completely unnecessary. So the £375,000 that Cabinet approved in July last year was money well spent. I know there's plenty of people who might say, well, I could told you you'd never be back in that building. I could told you wouldn't solve those issues. But, this is our biggest asset. It is our footprint, and it is right and proper that we allocate the right amount of taxpayers' money to give us the answer to the exam question. And the exploratory work at County Hall is set out in paragraph 10 and 11, indeed set out exactly what we needed to look at, and indeed then 20 and 21 set out the costs as a result of it, and the building condition high-level information is set out in paragraph 23 of the report. And therefore, it's absolutely right, as paragraph 32 sets out, that we declare County Hall as surplus, and the rationale for doing so are set out little 1 to 7. It's multifaceted. Whilst we employ as full-time equivalent over 3,000 staff, the majority of those staff were never based at County Hall. You know, our frontline social workers, whether they be children or adults, are visiting residents in our communities. They're locality based. All of our highways officers on the front line are our depots, and they're on the front line, you know, pounding the roads and pavements. Our public rights of way officers, the countryside service, whilst they might have a base over the road from County Hall, they're out and about on the patch. All of our library staff, lots of our caretakers, lots of other staff. So I could go on and on and on. And as you know, it's been pretty evident. We really only ever had 400 or 500 staff at any one time in County Hall. We've got 300 workstations based at Wildwood, a building that we've had a long lease on, and that's met most of the demand. We've got some workstations at Pershore, and indeed the public estate in Worcestershire will have been able to accommodate our council meetings, and you know, the costs of hiring within that public estate are de minimis, frankly, and of course that money is reinvested into the public purse to benefit residents anyway. And with the substantial ongoing costs, and you know what it costs us to run County Hall, you know, the budget allocation in this financial year alone is 2.4 million gross. Netted off, that's still a £1.25 million. You know, we're still going to have to pay business rates. We've got security costs to make sure the building is safe, and it's absolutely right and proper that we don't rush a decision, but that we set a timescale so that a decision can be made. What I think would be negligent, notwithstanding that we know that a unitary is coming in whatever form, is just to sit and do nothing, mothball it, leave it for 2 or 3 years whilst you're still paying your business rates and you're still paying your security costs. That's not the type of politician that I am, and I think that would be negligent for the communities that we represent, which is why I'm proposing taking this to the next stage. And it will ultimately, when we've done the options appraisal, because I don't wish to predetermine any views moving forwards, when we've done the options appraisal, which are set out in 45(1) to 4, we will make the cabinet in the first quarter of 25-26 will make a decision on the best approach. But this is really kick-starting the firing gun as a result of all of what I've said, particularly the multifaceted reasons in 1 to 7 on paragraph 32, that we are formally declaring County Hall surplus to requirements. And with that, Leader, I command the recommendations to Cabinet.
Thank you, Marcus, and I'll happily second this one. As colleagues know, this has been an issue that we've grappled with for a number of months now in relation to what to do with the building, and obviously getting professional advice and having further investigations was important because we needed the evidence to be able to make this decision. I think, as Marcus has set out, local government has shifted quite a lot and changed, obviously, in the use of mobile and flexible technology over recent years, and as a result of the pandemic. And ultimately, with the news at Christmas that reorganisation was going to take place across Worcestershire and indeed the other 21 councils, it's eminently sensible to look at how we use the public estate across Worcestershire in terms of a future authority. And the people that we have coming into the building, whilst we still have a significant number of people that need to come into a central building, obviously they don't all need to come into a HQ based in Worcester, and so utilising the whole of the public resources is eminently sensible, and it embeds us in our communities across Worcestershire. We're a very diverse county in the county of Worcestershire, and using those public buildings as we've been able to do over many months now, having our meetings going round and seeing different parts of the county and utilising that, I think is a way forward. The other point I would make is, of course, we did have a number of tenants in County Hall, so whilst there was a substantial cost of running County Hall, that was significantly subsidised up to RAC occurred by people like DEFRA and other tenants. We had HMRC in there in previous years, and so that income from other public sector partners was helping to reduce the net cost. Ultimately, without that, There's no way that the costs could be borne by the County Council. And I am very persuaded, colleagues, as somebody who's obviously been engaged for a long time on this, by that table. If you look through that table 1 on page 45 of the considerable costs, we're not just talking about RAC, we're talking about issues in relation to building condition, the M&E which would be required, single glazing a lot of the building, antiquated heating and lighting, etc. Being able to bring that building back into use is a substantial portion of money. Now, if a future purchaser of the site or the building wished to do that, then obviously it's within their gift to do so, and they can make whatever business case they require, whoever that might be, and that we wouldn't want to predetermine that. This decision for today, to be clear, is to say it's surplus to our requirements and will no longer be our HQ, and to commission whatever work is required for the next Cabinet report in the new council to make the decision about its future use of the site. And I think we need to be really clear about that. It's no longer going to be our HQ and it's surplus to requirements, but its future use, which is very much the point that other contributors are making, that is for the new council to consider as part of their report. And of course, in that period, they will be engaging with interested stakeholders. That's right and proper to do so. I'm not aware of all those stakeholders that will be engaged as part of that process, but I'm sure people will come forward before the council makes a decision in the new council as to what's best for the land and asset that we have there, which is a substantial resource that, of course, needs to be made in a right and proper. Those decisions need to be made in a right and proper way with the evidence available. So that is for the new council. What we're saying today is no longer our HQ, surplus to our operational requirements and need. So I will just stop there, and I'll invite the Chief Exec, I think.
No, I just want to quickly, new council you mean after May?
Yes.
You're not new council.
No, yes. The Chief's thinking we might be leaving this to the new unitary authority. I just wanted to clear.
I just wanted to be clear.
We're not leaving to the new, the new council, I mean the new Worcestershire Council, to be elected after May, because that obviously is within the first quarter of the financial year, and we won't be leaving it to the new unitary council. No, very good, Chief. Adam.
Yeah, thank you, Leader, and thank you, Marcus, as the previous Cabinet member with responsibility for this, and I'm sure the previous Cabinet member prior to that with responsibility for this. The subject has always been floating around, and I suppose I just want to bring you back to why we're here, because yet again it's like we're getting beaten up about this building with RAC, and just a little bit of research. I just want to remind everybody how this actually came about. I think some Education Minister said some flippant comment in a meeting somewhere that's now ended up with 47 hospitals, 200 plus schools, and God knows how many public buildings condemned because of some building practices from the 60s and 70s. And I think we're all aware this was a building that was built in the 70s. And the construction techniques through the 60s and 70s weren't probably as much adhering to the look and feel of the building as to let's just get it up in any way possible. And I think a lot of buildings across the whole of the UK have suffered from this. But again, this is another card we've been dealt. All of a sudden, this happened. I mean, it's, I suppose, akin to COVID and Brexit and other things on the national government stage. But you think that, as if we don't have enough to do with delivering services, somebody keeps bowling these things to us. But the government responded quite interestingly in the way that they dealt with RAC in the hospitals. They paid to repair them. Yeah, they're not paying us to repair County Hall. And to be honest, would we? I suppose within what Marcus was saying, there's a question of financial viability. That table is quite clear, and there's another aspect that is part of that table, which is net zero. I mean, there are requirements, and I mean, I'm not sure whether you're actually aware of them in terms of what is required within commercial buildings over the next few years for EPC ratings. And many of our residents are whining about having to put in heat pumps because it's been forced on them, and not being able to let properties out unless they meet a particular EPC rating, which is seeing expenditure on properties way beyond financial viability, both on residential and commercial. So there is a big question here, and something else that is coming in terms of, I think under the current plans, a C rating would have been required by 2028, and I certainly think that would have been over 12 or 14 million, which probably would have curtailed being able to let County Hall out, as the leader talked to. And I think B from 2030, I mean, honestly, it's cuckoo land really in terms of the costs and the money you'd have to start from scratch really. You basically condemn most buildings, most commercial buildings, if you were looking at it that way. So I think it's worth us noting that this wasn't something we particularly wanted to deal with. County Hall was being used quite well, and then we had Legionnaires as well. So I mean, not a great card to be dealt with. But one thing I did want to mention, and it's like the investment we made in broadband that allowed us to get everybody working from home during COVID. The switch from County Hall to Wildwood was seamless. The work that went on behind the scenes and how quickly people have got up and running in that building was quite remarkable. And we're still providing all the same services, everything's going ahead. And now with the unitary reform, we're going to have a glut of public buildings that obviously some are going to be repurposed for other purposes and some will be utilised. I mean, look at us here today in this chamber. You know, we are using the assets, the one estate, that one Worcestershire approach. And I think really, I wanted to make sure everybody was aware that, you know, this isn't just us. There's schools, hospitals, I think Solihull Library. I look back, Birmingham Library was actually built the year before this, I think. And that got demolished 11 years ago, you know, and similar sort of concrete structure, that would have definitely been condemned. But, you know, happy to see the report come forward, really welcome it, and we'll support the changes and picking the right thing and the right situation for the site.
Yeah, very excellent comments, Adam, in terms of that context. The context changed quite rapidly across the UK, how many people are having to grapple with the same problem, but also the environmental changes in terms of standards for buildings, which are, you know, rapidly changing, and therefore buildings that might have been acceptable at one point clearly aren't acceptable in terms of the future. And that context is really, really important for us. And I'd really echo that point and thank staff and management in all areas, because actually we managed to keep things going, not just during COVID, but also in terms of these rapid changes in terms of our buildings and assets, and the public didn't notice at all in terms of the services being provided. So it's eminently sensible now to utilise the public resource across Worcestershire as part of One Worcestershire. But I'll bring in Emma.
Yes, thank you, Leader. And yeah, on the environmental side, you must look at also the disposal and the you know, the raising of the ground of this particular property, should that be a way forward. And I actually flippantly highlighted a comment in the report where it said a capital receipt. And it may not necessarily be a capital receipt. There may still be a liability regarding the environmental costs. However, the land will certainly meet something, but it's not as big as what we would expect. And when you look at if we were to create a new building with new environmental measures in place, it would actually be £14 million as on that in year one, just to make it habitable. So it is a particularly strange situation to be in. So thank you.
Yeah, you're right. In terms of that is for the council post May. But ultimately they will have to be aware of all the issues in terms of changes to the building. Now, I've got a range of other speakers, but I wonder whether I'll bring in Matt first.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you, Marcus, for the report. I've got basically a couple of quick questions you may be able to answer. Firstly, about I've kind of heard rumours that there are some restrictions on what could be built on the County Hall site. Do you know, or are you aware of any restrictions as such? And the second question is around paragraph 51, talking about temporary uses for the car parks. I know my fellow Green councillor, Andrew Cross, is very keen to kind of ease congestion at hospitals. So any update on what those plans will be very helpful. Thank you.
You might want to respond now or gather your thoughts, Marcus.
Well, I just respond now with the same comment. If I had 10 minutes to gather my thoughts, I'm thinking on my feet, but as a judge once said to me, if it assists, please sit down. In terms of any restrictions on this site, of course, any future use will be the subject of a full planning application and will require full planning consent. Whether there are any restrictive covenants that this couldn't be used for X, Y and Z, I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm sure a very skilled and qualified solicitor within this council would soon be able to answer that. But I guess that's really a question for others who want to acquire the site, should we decide to, or should I say, should a future cabinet post may decide to sell it. In respect of the car park and the land that we've got available at County Hall, now that we are deeming this site surplus to requirements, we can actively look at seeing where we can come into agreement with third-party organisations that might want to utilise some of our estate. And indeed, I am happy to say that our officers in property have been in discussions and reached an agreement in principle to utilise some of our land under a licence arrangement. So now that the building is being deemed surplus, we can now sensibly and properly try and assist third-party organisations if we're in a position to do so.
And I think that's a crucial point, which is up till now that building hasn't been declared surplus to requirements or a decision made about whether it would be brought back into use. We're clearly saying today and deciding as a cabinet we won't be bringing it back into use, and it will be surplus to our requirements, and therefore it opens up the opportunities to make further decisions in relation to temporary usages. And just to be clear, we always knew that would be the case, but it'd be wrong and quite improper to make those, to bind the hands, if you like, of decision makers if we were not declaring it surplus to requirements. And if we were uncertain as to whether we were going to bring it back into use. And so over a number of months, whilst our own staff have obviously been parking in one of the car parks because people have to utilise Wildwood, we've also had a contractor's compound there, and that's obviously meant that until this report came forward and decision was made, difficult to make those enter into those licences. But now we're obviously free to do so. Once the Cabinet has now made this decision today, Matt. So we will be moving on along that track. Just look for any other contributors. And if not, maybe we should move on because we've got a very busy agenda, colleagues. Are you happy to agree this report? Agreed. Okay. Move to agenda item number 6. So we've got the Education Sufficiency Annual Update, and I'll invite David Chambers just to introduce this, and Steve I think is going to second.
Thank you, Leader. Within the school organisation plan, 3 sufficiency reports provide the operational direction for the overall strategy, and they are of course early years and childcare sufficiency, mainstream schools including sixth forms, and SEND sufficiency. If I can, I'll make a few observations, first of all, on the early years in childcare. Since April 2024, existing childcare support has been expanded in phases. First of all, from April 2024, eligible working parents of 2-year-olds have access to 15 hours of funded childcare support over 38 weeks of the year, or up to 52 weeks of the year if fewer hours are used per week. And then from September 2024, supported childcare places increased for children from 9 months to 23 months, similar to the hours above. By 2026, the government's ambition is that all parents and carers of primary school-age children will be able to access childcare in term time from 8 o'clock in the morning until 6 o'clock in the evening. Each term, the number of childcare places available and the estimated demand for places is analysed at both individual ward and across neighbouring wards to ascertain if there are sufficient places available. and you can see in the appendices the breakdown clearly of the ward structure and whether there is sufficiency or insufficiency in each of the divisions. Take-up of the early years entitlement in Worcestershire is higher than the national and regional averages, and we have sufficient childcare available for all 2, 3 and 4-year-olds, and we are on target to meet our statutory obligations. Moving to mainstream school age sufficiency, due to the increase in the number of primary age children in the last 10 years, the school capacity has increased, and the number of primary and first schools to places have increased to ensure demand is met. Whilst growth has been felt across the county, Bromsgrove, Evesham and Redditch have experienced higher rates than rural areas. We're seeing an increasing number of families moving to urban areas, a trend we see nationally. And we see a further increase, we will see a further increase over the next 5 to 10 years, with the number of large housing developments expected. In addition to Bromsgrove, Evesham and Redditch, additional places will also be required in Droitwich, Kidderminster, West and South Worcestershire. Worcestershire County Council discuss options with schools, housing developers and district councils as early as possible. New first and primary schools have been included in district plans and agreed with housing developers. Some areas have a surplus of places, and officers are working with these schools to ensure balance wherever possible. Mainstream school provision across Worcestershire is currently sufficient. There is, however, a challenge to keep a small rural village school sustainable. 36 mainstream schools have fewer than 100 pupils on the roll as in October last year, with 1 primary and 1 first school both having less than 20 pupils. Several other schools have fewer than 50. Pupil numbers in secondary schools began to increase following several years of lower numbers. This is expected to continue through to 2026. Officers have been working with secondary and higher schools to ensure sufficiency support for higher numbers, and this has been apparent from my visits to the schools over the last 9 months. Further expansion will be required to support growth in Bromsgrove and Worcester City, and further details can be read within the report from paragraphs 42 onwards. The majority of new housing planned to be delivered in Worcestershire is set out in the SWDP, the South Worcestershire Development Plan, up to 2041. This plan includes a target of 11,000 new homes on top of the 28,400 homes already planned for up to 2030 in the current SWDP, a process I remember only too well when I served on Malvern Hills District Council. The largest strategic site is planned for Worcestershire Parkway, which will include some 10,000 new homes. During the academic year 2023-24, an additional 520 school-aged pupils arrived in Worcestershire and applied for a mainstream state-funded school place where their originating country was known to be outside of Europe. For the academic year 24-25, 77 applications have been received for Worcestershire children moving from independent mainstream schools to state-funded mainstream schools following the introduction by the government of VAT on independent school places. And you can see, therefore, the continuing increase in demand. Still referring to mainstream provision, I want to highlight a couple of specific areas within the report. Firstly, the Pershore Education Planning Area. Since 2020, the Pershore Education Planning Area has been consulting and undertaking changes to review and transition this group of schools to an all-primary and secondary school system. Consultation concluded on the 29th of September last year, and this has taken a considerable amount of work by each of the schools and our officers. The majority of stakeholders were in support of the change, and I visited a number of those who were less convinced and who are now determined to make this new beginning work. All decision makers have approved the proposals, and the initial changes will commence in September this year, and the process will conclude in September 2027, when all 7-year places in the Pershore education planning area will be delivered at Pershore High School. Bromsgrove High education planning area. The situation in Bromsgrove is complex, and I would urge colleagues to read paragraphs 57 to 62 in the report. There are 2 high schools in Bromsgrove, and both schools are forecast to be full in the next few years, with a predicted increase in pupils from new housing to the west of the town. Forecasting continues to predict insufficient places in Bromsgrove High Schools, and both schools have agreed to increase their offer of places for September 2025. This is unlikely, however, to be sufficient for all applicants, and some pupils will have to be accommodated at their next nearest school or schools, with available places and the implication of home-to-school transport. Worcester City secondary education planning area. There continues to be insufficient secondary school places in Worcester City. It has not been possible to maintain any surplus places in Worcester City. Forecasts are predicting a need for additional places for September 2026 and September 27. The south area of Worcester is where the largest demand exists and where it's expected to continue to rise. Until a new school is built, it's envisaged that there will be additional home-to-school transport costs required in order to transport children to their nearest next available school. And just a brief update on the new Worcester City Secondary School. In February 2021, Cabinet agreed for a new secondary school to be built in Worcester City, and in March 2024, Cabinet approved a revised timeline for the new secondary school to be delivered for September 2028, together with an increased budget. A joint hybrid planning application was submitted on the 31st of July last year. Land purchase negotiations have reached the stage where a draft conditional contract to purchase the school site has been prepared, and negotiations are now at an advanced stage. Once the land transfer is completed, however, WCC will be committed to substantial infrastructure costs, and therefore it may be wise to revisit these obligations before taking this process any further. Sufficiency of education with regarding to children and young people with SEND, special education and needs and disabilities. The number of children and young people who have special educational needs and or disabilities has continued to increase nationally in recent years. The number of children and young people aged up to 25 in Worcestershire has increased from 3,064 in January 2018 to more than 6,000 today. The percentage of pupils with EHCPs in Worcestershire educated in the mainstream provision increased from 27.9% in 2018 to 38.2% in 2024. This continues to be below the national average, which happens to be 43.3% in 2024. As Cabinet will know, officers are now working on plans to increase the number of children with lower level EHCPs to take up education at their local mainstream school from September this year. This will apply to new school applications, and also we will be encouraging children currently in special schools to transfer to their local mainstream school. This, of course, will require sensitive discussions with schools, parents and carers, but I firmly believe this is the right thing to do and in the best interest of the child. On my visit to schools, I have seen how this can work, where children integrate and grow together, and I want to build this best practice here across the rest of Worcestershire. This will of course require financial support to implement, and I'm grateful to the Cabinet for their support. An additional consequence of this change will also result in a welcome saving to the home to school budget. Officers continue to work with all specialist settings, in particular special schools, to review all options available to ensure the best configuration of spaces and ensuring the best interest of the child or young person are met. We, like every other local authority, urgently need the government to review the legislation in terms of the SEND sector, as it simply is no longer fit for purpose, and of course the sector continues to be grossly underfunded. In summary, the conclusions are listed on page 76, paragraphs 124 to 129. Finally, we are on track with regards to sufficiency, but it is not without its individual complexities. And I want to pay tribute for the work officers continue to undertake in this very complex area. It is very much an ongoing piece of work and will continue to be so. And so, Leader, I ask Cabinet to note or approve, where applicable, the recommendations at paragraph 1, A to I, in this report. Thank you.
Thanks, David, and thanks for a very excellent summary, very detailed summary in terms of the proposals, because obviously really important in terms of children's education, making sure that we've got sufficiency in our schools. Constantly we're praising that in relation to development coming forward at a rapid rate in some cases, and obviously demographic changes in terms of age groups, as well as obviously the complexities you said in terms of SEND provision. So a very detailed report, and you've summarised it excellently as always, and I'd invite Steve to second it.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Very happy to second the report, and after that extremely comprehensive review of the papers given by my colleague, I will reserve my right to speak on it.
Steve, thank you, Steve. I'll look for any other contributors and bring in Adam.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you to the Cabinet member for quite a conclusive report. I think, as I iterated in the previous item, this is one of the facts brought out are one of the biggest issues facing the whole of the United Kingdom, really. It's not just us, as we talked about earlier. I just wanted to bring home some of the points you talked about, the increases, really, over a short period of time, because I think I was first elected in 2017. What an easy year that was after that, till the Withall floods in 2018, but we'll talk about that at the end of this meeting. But I think one of the facts that came back to me was the home to school transport element. We were talking about 30 million of, that's, if we need it, we've got it type thing. And I wanted to bring a couple of things home, really, just in terms of one small part of one part of that inflationary thing. I think in 2018-19 we had 1,629 children with special educational needs with home to school transport, and the average cost per child per annum was £4,358. That was actually still a lot of money. It was £7 million, at that particular point in time. But in 24 we had a huge increase in the number of children, 2,719, but the cost had gone up to £9,384 average per child, which is 25.5 million. So within that short period of time, we've gone from 7 million to 25.5 million. Now, many people turn around, the taxes, why are you using them? What's the cost? Our costs of 9,384 average are actually substantially less than the net average across the country, I think, which is 9,750. So pretty much all the councils are paying the same money. I mean, great if we'd got a fleet of volunteers that could all turn up, 2,700 of them on a Monday morning to take these children to school. But I think in practical terms, we know it's not going to happen. So it's coming back to this again is a national problem that needs clear thought and clear investment in how we actually deal with it. And I've talked before about the outcomes for the children, not just the financial element. The fact that a child is being picked up in the morning in a taxi, predominantly, possibly with a driver they've never seen before, accompanied by somebody that they've never seen before, to go for an hour or an hour and a half in a journey to somewhere else, and then to come back. So 2 or 3 hours in a taxi for a child with special educational needs. Now, for me, that's unacceptable. And I'm absolutely delighted that we're working towards this local provision, which from everything I've spoken, cross-party across the UK, everybody accepts that we've got to get this local provision. It's got to be at the right level. It's got to meet the needs of the children, but it has to be local. Because you're taking, I remember getting a bus from my area where I wasn't at school to another area, and you're at loggerheads with the children in that area then. This isn't just about giving you what you need locally, it's about you being ingratiated into your local community. So I'm delighted to see what we're doing. Finances are terrible, but we're doing our very best with our hands tied behind our back to solve this problem that others are not giving us a solution to.
Absolutely. Bring in David if you want to address that, or do you want to pick up that and Karen's points? So we might have a range of points. Yep. Karen.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for indulging me. Thank you to the Cabinet Member for Education with presenting this report. It makes very interesting reading and very much appreciated. In terms of Bromsgrove, and with my other hat on, I lead Bromsgrove District Council, I am exceedingly concerned and becoming more and more concerned, both by the number of houses that we're having to build. Our number's gone from 386 to 713 per annum up to 2040, which will see an increase of 12,121 homes. Building on that, you can see the capacity issues we currently have, and thanks to the Assistant Director of Education, Early Years Inclusion and Pupil Place Planning, who came to meet me at Bromsgrove to discuss the current challenges we have. And they are considerable. But I would just like to draw anybody observing this meeting attention to paragraph 60, which talks about North Bromsgrove High School and South Bromsgrove High School were completed under a private finance initiative. The cost of this per annum currently is £10 million to pay back the money. There's a need for another form entry of 30 places per year, and the expansion of South Bromsgrove High School has been estimated for that one form entry of an additional £10 million, and that equates to £122,000 per place, when the government actually allocates for Worcestershire secondary schools £21,864 per place. So you can see there's a considerable differential between the actual costs of introducing this one form entry and what we're faced with on the ground. I do this because we've just had a discussion about the budget, and the Department of Education aren't very forthcoming with monies actually to address this. So we need a change in policy on this one as well to address the needs. Education's really important to everyone. If you educate, you upskill, you inspire and enable your residents to become aspirational for the future and to live in Worcestershire and to contribute to the bigger economy. So I am concerned, and the planners, if they're watching at Bromsgrove, will say she's going on about this again, but I am going to keep going on about this because education is really important to our residents, and every time they sit down and say, come on Karen, let's have a conversation about house building, my first conversation is, have you sorted out education yet? I understand the challenges, but we're faced with them here on the ground. And I have to go back and look in the mirror and talk to residents and say, this is what we're doing to educate the future generations of Bromsgrove District. So I thank you for the report. I'd like it to be fixed at pace. I don't know how we do that, Councillor Chambers, but together, and I'm very grateful, as I say, to the Assistant Director for her time in coming and speaking. And I did offer a piece of land in Bromsgrove that could be looked at potentially to address some of this. So I'm not just picking a fight with this, I'm actually raising some solutions as well. But this is a real life implication of the house building on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And it's another really good example, because it links to the budget, of demands placed on the council, because ultimately we have to provide, we've got statutory duty to provide school places. It's non-negotiable, and rightly so. But ultimately, the amount that we're getting through the process, through developer contributions, is not meeting that. And the money we're getting from government isn't. So more and more of our resources in the capital programme are going to have to start being spent on schools to meet that need, or in SEND provision. And ultimately, we might say that's absolutely required, but it's clearly not fair for the local taxpayer to have to pay that resource when those requirements are imposed by government. So you're right that this is another problem for the future.
Can I just come back, Leader, as well, please? And when we also speak in the report about busing children across to a school to educate them, that again is an additional challenge for this council. When Councillor Kent's just spoken about home to school transport, we're just adding to the challenges by doing that. And children like to be educated locally so they can build up a peer group and socially interact as well. Thank you.
Which is why we're having to use some of our own resources, as stretched as they are, to try and invest in those schools to be able to accommodate some needs. And I would say some needs. There are always going to be needs that can't be accommodated in local school. We all accept that. And it has to be in the best interest of the child. But I'm answering David's questions for him, so I'll leave him to do the job. But I've got... shall I just pause there, David? Do you want to take a third contributor? Or, yeah. Shall I take Matt? And then...
Thank you, Simon, and thank you, David, for the report. It's certainly interesting issues that we face, and I think a couple of points related to the new school in Worcester, and then basically all the issues with the pressures on special educational needs and EHCPs, because there seems to be, obviously, there's the cost of this new school seems to be going up a lot. There seems, there seems to be like there's question over review, so that'd be interesting to know more about that, but also the kind of pressures on the EHCP, the forecast is it's going to be up to 10,000, over 10,000 EHCPs by 2029. And we know certainly capacity in a lot of our schools is really struggling. They're kind of, confined to the location they've got, a lot of them such as Fort Royal and Riverside. So I suppose the question is around how do we kind of, having SEN places within mainstream schools is great, but I think there is an issue of just the number of children with complex needs that are coming into places like Fort Royal and other schools in the county are probably not going to be able to manage in those mainstream. So we really need to invest some way in having more actual SEN provision. And then, so that comes back to the question of this new school in Worcester, whereas actually, the demand for high school age is actually peaking in 2029. And so it's like, how do we fit those two together, whether there is scope for more SEN provision within this new school, high school in Worcester, whether that's the right location. Probably someone mentioned County Hall, there's a space going there, but I mean, don't open a can of worms there. But there's a lot of questions within that, how we kind of factor in getting more SEN provision is the key point. Thank you. Thank you.
Just on that very point, of course, if everything was standing still and there was no more building for Worcestershire, then I think, you'd have a very valid point. But of course, we're going to be building a brand new town for Worcestershire, just down the road, within actually this catchment area of the new school. So in the immediate vicinity, you could say in terms of education planning, there will be quite considerable demands. And of course, it's right that the developer will be pushing the developer to pay for school provision. But in those early days, I can imagine this is yet another demand. So that's something we do need to factor in. And those houses are going to be built much quicker than people think, because the reality is the government has made it very clear that their targets are going up. I think some 68% increase across Worcestershire, which is phenomenal, isn't it? And that's not unique. Many other counties I speak to across the county network are facing those kind of pressures, enormous pressures. It isn't as if we weren't having to build more homes in our existing plan. We were very ambitious for house building across South Worcestershire, and in other parts of the county. But those numbers are going up extraordinarily, aren't they? So a future council is going to have to plan for that need, and they're going to be very cognizant that those children will need education. And whilst many children obviously start out at primary school, and many of the people moving the new developments will have primary age children very quickly, they will need secondary provision in time. And so this is a challenge. The school building programme is a big challenge. And I go back to, it is something that government's going to have to grapple with. So absolutely, we need to be lobbying, very much on a cross-party basis, government, I think, to say SEND provision, we clearly need investment in, but we also need these issues addressed with school places, because at the moment they sit on our balance sheet, and they're yet another demand that isn't going away. But I'll bring David in.
Thank you, Leader. The three speakers there, there's some overlap indeed in some of the points that have been raised. And certainly when it comes to sufficiency, I think the final word I did in my presentation was how complex it is, and it most certainly is. Going to Adam first then, if I may. I'm grateful for his support, and he's also helped lead on this and the changes with regards to home to school transport. I mean, so far in this financial year, we've managed to make savings, or the Transport Department have, of something like £1.6 million so far. And I don't think we can underestimate, I don't have a figure, we haven't worked out a figure, of the potential savings that we can make with this initiative for children with, and I must make this clear, lower level EHCPs to be educated in their local mainstream school. Karen mentioned about busing children around the county. I simply couldn't agree more. That is what we want to stop, or reduce rather, to reduce the home to school transport budget. However, in my mind, this has been taken over by the fact that I'm absolutely convinced that it's better for the child. And this is very much child-driven here. It has to be better for a child with low-level EHCPs to be educated in their local mainstream school. I was at a school last week, and to say I was impressed, most of the classes there, up to 30% of the children in each class have EHCPs. And I spent a lot of time at the school going from classroom to classroom to classroom. And I knew which children had EHCPs because I'd been told as we were going round. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known, because these children were utterly integrated into this classroom environment. And something that was different, we all know that children with EHCPs will need to be taken out of the system for half an hour, quarter of an hour, 20 minutes or whatever. They need time out. They might need to just sit in a quiet area. And in some schools, I've seen these quiet areas. They're very nice, and a child can go and sit in there for 20 minutes or so. Not at this school. There was a whole wall lined up with individual areas where children can go and sit, very nicely decorated, I have to say, and they could just sit there and do work for 20 minutes or so. But because it was along a whole wall, this wasn't just for children with EHCPs. This was for all children of this age group. So they could all take time out, and the importance here is that the children then with EHCPs did not feel different to any other child. And the important thing for those children that didn't have EHCPs, it's completely part of normal life. They don't see these children any difference to themselves. And that's what we have to try and create, so that when you have children together in a school, if they've got a low-level EHCP, they shouldn't feel different, and neither should their colleagues feel any different. It's all part and parcel of the same. And that's what we want to see. Now, I 100% believe that this is possible, and I'm really grateful to the officers for working, which was a bit, it's all happened rather quickly, and it's not something that's easy to decide. And I appeal to parents and carers in particular to work with us on this, because I know it's a big change, and I know it won't be supported, but the response going round the schools that I've had is absolute support from our school network, and I'm extremely pleased where that's concerned. Going back to Karen, officers have briefed me on the complexities around Bromsgrove at the moment, and in particular with the initiative, the PPC initiative that you referred to. So they are aware, and they will continue to work with yourself and others, both assistant directors, of course, to try and get the best outcome for you. But the demand in building is just something that we cannot put to one side. It is a factor. It has to be addressed, and we will do so. With regards to Matt and the new school in Worcester, you're right, Matt. I mean, costs are escalating. substantially escalating in terms of infrastructure and in terms of the actual building itself. And I'm going to try and choose my words carefully here, but when I was speaking about the school, I'm not standing for re-election in May, so it will be somebody else's problem, if you like, to sort this one out with officers. But I think there's perhaps a little bit of a rethink necessary. And in terms of sufficiency, I believe we have time, not a lot of time, but we have time for that rethink to take place, just a little bit of time out, because of the reasons that you have raised this morning. So I think that's where I'd like to leave it, rather than say anything more, and see what colleagues in the future may come up with. Thank you, Chairman.
I'll bring in Steve as well. You were indicating.
Yes, thank you, Leader. The report has highlighted the difficulties that we've had with the concern over SEN provision, leading to higher placement costs, etc., as well as the impact of new housing developments, what that's going to bring. If you couple that with the financial pressures, rising construction costs, etc., together with the risk of reduced government funding, well, those are the challenges. They're made quite clear in the report, and they're going to be difficult to overcome. But the report also highlights, and I think it's worthwhile pointing this out, that the provision that this county does give is of high quality, with 89% of schools in Worcestershire being rated as good or outstanding by Ofsted in 23-24. We have, in relation to parental preference, the majority of primary and secondary school applicants receive one of their top 3 school choices, indicating good capacity planning. We have new developments in SEN provisioning, the opening of a SEN unit at Honeywell and the planning for a 120-place special free school for students with EHCPs. These are positive steps going forward. The Council has maintained its statutory duties for 2-, 3- and 4-year-olds, ensuring access to early years education. So amongst the challenges, there are positives. This county has done well in giving the provision to children that it has, and with the planning and the officers' commitment to their roles that we see, I'm hopeful and I'm fairly certain that this type of results will go forward, as does the council go forward.
Thanks, Steve. I absolutely echo those views in terms of the quality of provision and the ratings. We've had quite a good debate on this item because it's a really important item for the future of Worcestershire. So any other speakers? If not, shall we agree, this, colleagues? Yeah. Next one is another education matter, which David's going to leave on, which is education planning obligations. Section 106 is really important. It links to the last item.
Thank you, Leader. You'll be pleased that my presentation is much shorter in this one. My initial opening comments are similar, in fact, to those that I made in the previous agenda item, in that the Council has a statutory duty to ensure there is sufficient places for early years and childcare places, sufficient school places for all children who are attending mainstream schools, which are publicly funded, and sufficient education provision for children and young people with special educational needs and or disabilities up to the age of 25 who have an EHCP. Without investment, schools and early education providers may not be able to mitigate the impacts of additional pupils generated by new housing developments. It's therefore important that developers and the Council take appropriate steps in securing a suitably robust Section 106 Education Planning Obligations Policy in partnership to mitigate the impact of new development on education infrastructure. The Education Planning Obligations Policy document sets out the approach the Council will take in assessing the impact of new housing development on educational provisions for all children, for those aged 0 to 25 years, and calculating the appropriate mitigation via conditions and planning obligations. Since the Council's education planning obligation policy was last reviewed, there have been changes to statutory duties on the Council and to the proportion of pupils with SEND, which has meant that the policy is no longer fully sufficient. With substantial housing development to take place in the coming months and years, it is essential that the education planning obligations policy is fit for purpose, especially as two of the greatest funding areas are highways, infrastructure and education. Following an internal review of the policy, it is recommended that Cabinet approves a 6-week formal consultation on the proposed changes. The proposed key stakeholders to be notified are listed in paragraph 20 of this report. Adoption of the updated policy following consultation would provide greater weight and substantiate our position when seeking developer contributions as part of planning applications, with implementation from the 1st of September this year or as soon as possible thereafter. The key changes to the policy are set out in paragraphs 11 to 15 of this report. They largely follow changes to the statutory changes in the provision of early years and childcare, the increase in the number of children and young people with the HCPs who require additional or enhanced provision. If consultation is approved by Cabinet today, formal consultation will take place between the 3rd of March and the 13th of April, with the final decision being made by the CMR for Education in consultation with the Director of Children's Services. And so, Chairman, I ask Cabinet to note or authorise where applicable the recommendations at paragraph 1, A to E in this report. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I'll bring in Steve.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, Leader. And once again, happy to second this report, but again, reserve the right to speak.
Any other contributors? Matt?
Thank you, Simon, and thanks for this. Just a quick question about, obviously, the update on the SEND proportion, so it's changing it to 4.9%. Well, I suppose from what we've discussed earlier, there's likely that that percentage will gradually increase probably every year. Is this kind of a document maybe that you can update every year, or is there a certain time frame before you can update it again? Because it seems to be, if it's a living document, it maybe should be updated quite frequently. Thank you.
I think it's traditional that we have an annual update with the data. That's always been, because of the in terms of the numbers on the last report. On this one, I think the obligations, it's not even frequently as up a year, but you all know, David.
I'll take advice from our officers. I think it's not annually, Leader, though I take the point that it could well be, but could one of my colleagues...
Yeah, my confusion. The last one we do on an annual basis is insufficiency. But this one is in relation to planning obligations. Apologies. Yeah. Adam, do you want to give us an update?
Yeah, it's detailed within the recommendations to the report that we do review this, and we review this on a regular basis. So in response to your question, Councillor Jenkins, that would be the recommendation in terms of going forward.
And I spotted David.
Thanks, Leader. Yeah, I just wanted to comment really on paragraph 3, where we're looking at the ensuring that we have a suitable Section 106 education planning obligations policy. Certainly I'm hearing of developments where developers are citing the viability of the project as an excuse to withdraw from their obligation for educational contributions or to make significant reductions in it. And I think this is a problem that's going to become more and more widespread as we have to try and meet the housing targets that have been imposed us by the government. It's not more a question, it's more of a comment. Thank you.
No, you're right, and it links to the financial pressures, doesn't it, that we mentioned earlier in the earlier debate on the budget and previous report. David, did you want to pick up that particular thing?
I would like to, Leader, because it's been some time since I sat on planning committees, and I have to say, even then, it used to infuriate me when I hear constantly from developers saying, well, if we give you what you're asking in area A, B, C or D, then that takes away the viability of the whole scheme. Then go back to the planning board and redesign your whole scheme and then come back with an appropriate, that's my answer to this. At the end of the day, I understand that we have to adhere to the government's requirements in terms of housing development, but then it is also the onus on the developer to come forward to us. If you've got infrastructure to put in place, you've got provision to provide, and that has to be within each of those schemes, in my view. So I would send them packing until they come back with a sensible proposal.
I think there's also the trade-offs, let's be honest. The more and more obligations have to be paid for, ultimately that cost of the land and everything else has to be taken in, and then it's the cost of the homes that people have to buy. So that is an issue, and without additional funding to the system from somebody, then ultimately this burden falls on us. We simply can't afford to keep on picking up that burden, frankly. But can we agree this in terms of the revision? I think it's eminently sensible we review our policy in relation to section 106 on whatever basis, whenever we need to, as the evidence and data changes. But are we happy to agree this? Yep. And then we'll move to agenda item number 8, which is the Minerals and Waste Local Development Scheme.
Thank you, Leader, and a highly technical report you will not see. I'd love to say I'm delighted to bring this report if I understood half of it, but fortunately I have my officer behind me in case of any tricky questions. To stop the hares from running, because every time somebody sees this minerals and waste and local development scheme, I think there is a fear factor across much of the county, but it is quite a basic document. Part of our, as shown in the background, as the local planning authority for minerals and waste planning, section 15 of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act, as amended, sets out the current requirement for local planning authorities to prepare and maintain a scheme and schedule of planning policy documents that it intends to produce, known as a local development scheme. And the Minerals and Waste Local Development Scheme, LDS, has two main purposes: to inform the public about the preparation and adoption of planning documents, and to establish and reflect council priorities and enable work programmes to be set for the preparation of the documents. So the main body of this is bringing a document that is already in existence up to date and is not causing any undue concern, I think, to many of our residents. So accordingly, I'd like to move the recommendations from 1A through to G, and if there are any questions, we have highly capable people capable of answering them.
Thank you, Adam. I'll happily second this. Obviously, LDS sets out the timescales for doing things as opposed to the detailed policies. And ultimately, we need to focus in terms of our work and efforts in terms of the waste local development, the waste local plan as opposed to the mineral one. And we need to update that, and therefore, in terms of financial resources, little g is so important because it's allocating a significant amount of resources to obviously focus on that in the years to come. But don't confuse this update with the actual plans themselves, which is what a lot of people do. They see minerals and waste, I think it's actually the plan. It's about the framework for developing those plans and the timescales to do so to comply with the various legislation as opposed to the actual discussion of the plans. And that would be how I'd summarise this document. So I'm happy to second it on that basis. All the recommendations set out, 1A, little a through to G on the other side. Any other points, Cabinet colleagues? Otherwise, shall we note this and agree it? Yep. And then the last but not insignificant item is Shrub Hill, and invite Adam to update on this one. And we've got a revised set of recommendations that you're going to put forward as well.
Yes, thank you, Leader. I'd just like to ask Hazel to run through the reasons for the changes, some technical changes on the recommendations on the issued report that's necessitated a corrected document to come out. So if you haven't got the corrected document, it is available, but Hazel will just run through the reasons why.
Thank you. So the amendment to the recommendations only relates to who is recommending the request to full council to authorise the addition of the Brownfield Land Release Funding Grant to the capital programme. So the published report said that that recommendation would be made by the Strategic Director for Economy and Infrastructure, when in fact it should be the Cabinet member with responsibility for economy and skills. So it's a minor amendment. It doesn't impact on the report or the recommendation per se. So the published report has recommendation 1A2. That is being removed, and instead there would be recommendations 1A 1 to 2, which would now be for the Strategic Director for E&I, 2 being deleted, and instead we'll make B, which will be for the CMR to make the recommendation. It will all be made abundantly clear should Cabinet agree in the published decision.
Glad that's really
well,
simple.
I'm very grateful that I didn't have to explain that. Absolutely clear. Thank you, Hazel. Now on to the actual report, and obviously I am moving the recommendations that have been eloquently referred to from 1A through to V. Now the background. I mean, Shrub Hill. I mean, anybody that's been over there, and I did organise a tour, I think, for the scrutiny group to go and have an actual look, because it was quite funny, because we had an item come to the economy panel and nobody had actually been. So I thought it'd be very beneficial to get some of the members over there to have a look round. And I think they were struck by the opportunity and the scale and see what is going on, really. And I suppose for my sins, I have an office in the centre of Birmingham and I'm desperately trying to move to, because with new local transport systems they're putting, nobody can actually get to it anymore. But in that area, it's in the Jewellery Quarter. And as I look round Shrub Hill, I see mirrors of the regeneration that's gone on in Birmingham. And I moved into Birmingham quite a number of years ago with this office. And honestly, I had to ask the police to stop knocking on the door for the footage of the drug deals that were going on outside the area. It was that bad. And to see the changes that have been made in that regeneration of very similar style buildings makes you realise the art of the possible. And I think sometimes you go and have a look at something and you think, what am I going to do? Well, there's pigeons flying around the building and you're dodging droppings. It's quite entertaining. So I'm delighted to be able to bring in this forward, because it's taken the first part of the development of the main site. I mean, many of you might have seen the brilliant video that we'd got of the time-lapse of demolishing the buildings at the side of the canal. There was an old great big metal shed there, and it was quite remarkable how quickly it went in terms of it. But I think there is a huge opportunity for regeneration, economic growth. And I suppose we talked about lots of other things at this council meeting, and this is really the sort of thing we should be doing, and we love doing, and we do really well. And Shrub Hill, some would say it was a gamble. I don't think so. The site has to be regenerated. Somebody has to do it. Somebody has to take on the reins and say we're going to get it done. So this is basically bringing forward the first phase of the development and giving us the opportunity to be able to get to a point that we can appoint a contractor, and the office has done a sterling job on it. It's great to see it moving forward, and if anybody hasn't gone round Isaac Maddock's house, I'm more than happy to arrange for any of the councillors to go and have a look, just see what's going on and what it's like. It's quite a remarkable building, really, because you see, this is one of those sort of 60s buildings, really, I suppose, to a certain extent on the one side, that you can see the scale and opportunity for employment, and how close it is to the train station, and what it's going to do for the regeneration within Worcester. So I'm delighted to bring the report forward. It's going to be great to see development on the main site, and as long as anybody understands the recommendations, I would hope we can get them through today.
Thank you, Adam. And I'd also I'll bring in Marcus to second it, but I'd say there's somebody who chairs the board with contributors from Worcester City. We work very much in partnership around this. Obviously, they were able to access some resources from government that's being able to be brought to the development, and actually working in terms of the planning framework as well for the supplementary planning document. So the two councils working in partnership, providing that vision and resources, can see one of our major game-changing sites come to fruition. So that next step change in the journey is most welcome. But I'll invite Marcus to take us through the seconding.
Thank you very much, Leader. Yes, I echo the sentiments and comments of Councillor Kent, who's moved the recommendations, and indeed you, Leader, and I will formally second the recommendations, of course, with the amendment that the Assistant Director for Legal and Governance clearly set out. You used the word journey a couple of Saturdays ago. I was on a journey from Kidderminster train station to Shrub Hill train station. Regrettably, I had to change at Shrub Hill to go to Cheltenham, but the train was cancelled. Perhaps because of the high winds, one knows not. So we're standing at Shrub Hill for a little longer than I might otherwise have been, and I was able to look out on this exact site, and it made me think about this report, and indeed commented on the land that was owned and the Brown Release funding grant that has obviously been successful. It's what I would class not quite redundant brownfield site, but brownfield site, city centre location that is, of course, absolutely rife for redevelopment, regeneration, absolutely right to bring in and bring forward the site as called Unit 1 of the Shrub Hill Industrial Estate for residential development, and obviously entirely proper that we do so, and obviously enter into the necessary contract for the works. And the funding that we've secured, as set out in paragraph 14, is really good news. And so is, of course, expanding phase 1 from lower yard to include the upper yard, and therefore support the necessary delegations to secure a development partner for Shrub Hill, which, of course, we discussed nearly a year ago, as can be set out within the report. Therefore, look forward to seeing the next stage of this project to, as I say, redevelop this brownfield site, which is exactly what we should be doing.
Thank you, Marcus, and I'll bring in any other contributors to the report. Otherwise, Tony.
Oh, thank you, Leader. Well, thank you to Adam for arranging the site visit. It's nice to see an area being developed like that, and hopefully in the future it will migrate to Lowesmoor as well to be redeveloped in some way. The potential there for domestic housing, which is needed in the city, would be obviously something that is being looked at and would be welcomed. What I would say, when they built the cathedral, they didn't build it to last 100 years, they built it to last many hundreds of years, looking into the future. And with a development of such as this, are we going to be looking at the next 50 years, or are we going to be looking into the future? And when you look at the problems of the traffic in Worcester and getting transport from Shrub Hill into the city, and do you think of something which is far beyond our vision, an overhead monorail or something like that to transport people? Would be something of the future, and something that could easily bring a smile to many people's faces to see something like that bought and look into the future. So what I would say is don't close our minds to a small vision. Let's look at this as a vision for the future, and to encompass the Worcester with the outskirts of Worcester City, and bring it all together with a transport system that would provide for the future and domestic housing as well.
Yeah, well, far be it from me, but that's a big challenge, isn't it, Tony, in terms of expansive visions. But What I would say is I spent the entire last Friday at a rail conference down in Oxfordshire, working with our Oxfordshire partners, because what we're both determined to do, of political administrations of quite different complexion, but actually improving our rail services across the county is one of our top priorities, and indeed seeing the improvements on the North Cotswold line that could enable 2 trains per hour, and so increasing the frequency but reducing the journey time and making sure that those services can come not just through to Shrub Hill, but one of those trains can go across towards Malvern, and another one can go up into the Wyre Forest via Droitwich and then Kidderminster and on to turn at Stourbridge Junction. Those services are really vital to be able to make sure people can move more sustainably across the county in terms of those longer journeys. And so very much this administration is really committed in terms of improving the network and the train services. But it's yet another one that both our councils agreed, along with the other neighbouring councils, the other 3 neighbouring counties along the line. So there's 5 counties along that line. It's one that we need government to invest in to unlock the opportunities for better rail service and more sustainable travel. So absolutely, enhancing rail services in terms of the county is a top priority, and that's why we work with our partners, whether it's Network Rail, train operating companies, to actually trying to persuade government in terms of the need for that long-term investment to realise that right mix, that right sustainable mix of transport, and rail definitely provides an opportunity. We can't do that as a county council, but we absolutely will be working with partners to be able to do that, and it's right to point out those issues. But I'll bring in Adam.
Yeah, thanks, Tony, and thanks for coming on the visit. Really, I think the whole idea is about 500 new homes. I think was the figure in terms of on a brownfield site that's currently not utilised, and up to 5,000 jobs. So you can see the sheer scale. It's interesting you talk about the maglev. I got back from Birmingham airport last night. I was on a long. I was at a trade show in Barcelona, trying to export stuff out to the world as we do, and that was one of the very first things that was done. I don't know whether you recall when that was done many years ago, when the technology was right at the very edge. And there's the Birmingham City have put in a substantial amount of investment into a huge quarter of similar types of properties, really. And one of the things they've asked for, ironically, is a tunnel from HS2 or from Birmingham all the way out to the football ground. And just, you know, in your dreams or whatever else, obviously I was at another trade show in Las Vegas a few months ago, and you've got Musk doing this boring company. And you think, well, what is it? Well, I went on it, and it's unbelievable. I mean, he's just worked out a way to do technology that means you can just, effectively, they're tunneling under all of those hotels in Las Vegas, which are absolutely huge, and linking them all together predominantly because in the environment they've got there with 45 degrees C temperature, you can't really walk around, and then they're just using electric cars underneath, so they haven't got the fumes or whatever. So I think technology will bring a lot of solutions to this. Whether we're going to have a tunnel from underneath Shrub Hill into the city centre is another thing. That might take a little bit more work. It's not be in my lifetime, perhaps, but anything is possible.
Yeah, as I'm reminded, there is a tunnel underneath the road. It's more of a walking tunnel as opposed to a tunnel for vehicles, but that vision for the future in terms of investing in our transport is very much at the heart of what we're doing, Tony. And you're right, if we can have more sustainable housing in the heart of the centre of Worcester, that's absolutely sensible. So I don't think we could be bereft of vision whilst realising the financial challenges as the Chief Finance Officer gets his bags. We won't be making any more commitments at the end of the meeting. But I have got one other item which I neglected to mention, which is on some supplementary paper. It is mentioned on the agenda, so it's right and proper we discuss it, which is a scrutiny report on small localised flood alleviation schemes and the Cabinet member response. And I don't know whether, Alistair, you want to introduce it first in terms of the report and the background and the findings, and then we move to the Cabinet member's response, and there will be Adam seconding. But sorry, I was encouraging people to think we had the last item, but there's just one sneaky one that we've got to cover off.
Thank you, Simon. Well, it's very topical because you were talking about it earlier, about flooding. And with climate change, we are seeing more frequent heavy rain, which is resulting in many more communities in Worcestershire suffering from flooding. And having one's home flooded is devastating. Also, floodwater makes many roads impassable, affecting commuters, children going to school and businesses. In recent years, many large-scale flood alleviation schemes have been built in Worcestershire that have saved hundreds of houses and businesses from flooding. But small-scale flooding that affects just a few homes and roads in rural areas are as important to those that are living there. So this scrutiny task group was set up to look at how we can build more small-scale flood alleviation schemes, looking at what has been achieved recently and to develop a blueprint or process to help elected members help their communities. So I'd like to thank all the various organisations that have attended our meetings and provided information and evidence that has helped our task group formulate this report. I'd like to also thank all the task group members and the scrutiny officers for their time, input and dedication that's made this report possible. And I'd like to thank the Cabinet Member for responsibility with her comments and her recommendations. So I'm going to pass over.
If I may, then, Leader, I would always like to say that we leave the best till last, but you knew that was coming, didn't you, really? Okay, I actually come from the scrutiny side of the fence, and I absolutely believe that the ideas from members who have the interest, the knowledge, the local intelligence, who can form good decisions and good outcomes. The small localised flood schemes, which are identified in the report, is exactly what they can do. And it's a concise and a considered report with achievable and meaningful recommendations that will not just be sat on the shelf and which can improve the area we all live in. I pay particular thanks to Councillor Adams for his persistence with these schemes over many years and in his local division, and where we see the signs of early collaborative working between the local authorities and affected residents, between water companies and neighbouring authorities. As identified many times, water takes no notice of constituency boundaries. Yesterday, I hear that the government are looking to invest an additional £2.6 billion into flood mitigation measures and natural water management schemes. Let's hope, and I will be asking, for our own county to gain from this fund and to support some of these localised flood schemes. There are 7 recommendations, namely to ensure accurate and timely collection of flood data. This is only being accepted in part as there are a new option and this recommendation being implemented by a combined post, which seems eminently sensible, but it is subject to funding. To fully support recommendation 2, which is to run a public information campaign on clearing ditches and riparian ownership. To part accept recommendation 3 for £800,000, but with the approval and the discussion of the budget and the capital budget earlier on in the meeting, and with the proposal for that going forward to the council, it is actually part of the 1.5 million pot already identified in the budget. And this is to assist with highways drainage and flood alleviation. I would actually like to point out that agile working is currently happening between the highways and the flood risk management team, and this is evident in Hanley Road, Upton upon Severn, where the drainage and the curbing is being installed to give the road users 2 or 3 more hours access before it gets closed and reopening 2 or 3 hours earlier. This is an absolute amazing benefit to the local economy, the tourism and the community. I'm happy to recommend item 4, which is the GIS mapping, and 5, the councillor induction, including the sharing of information, which all seems very logical. For number six, there is an absolute agreement that all information to outside bodies should be available to members, but this is caveated with the fact that all members should be diverted through the liaison officer. And finally, number 7, where we come to the blueprint, as mentioned by Councillor Adams, or a pro forma on how to identify and process small community flood mitigation schemes. And this is where I take the opportunity to point across to Councillor Kent and refer to the Sycamore Drive scheme that over in Withall. And I was absolutely pleased to investigate that scheme a couple of weeks ago. They had tried to lock me out. However, I did climb the gate and trespassed. And I was absolutely stood in the middle of a muddy field and looking at the scheme and wondered how perfectly simple and yet so effective. This is exactly the purpose of the Overview and Scrutiny Report, to bring to life simple, effective and local solutions to flood mitigation. I am pleased to propose this report to the Cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you for all the work that you've been doing, obviously, with Alistair as well. I think we really welcome the report, but I'll look to Adam first in terms of seconding, and then David.
Yes, thank you, Leader, and thank you, Alistair and Emma, for bringing forward this. It's quite funny. I look at some of the recommendations and I think, well, when I was elected in 2017, I thought, right, this is what everybody had told me was being a councillor. And then in 2018, I think Withall had I think I was referred to calling it an apocalypse, actually, and it was no laughing matter, I suppose, really. The biggest pluvial flooding issue you've ever seen, with a vast amount of rainfall in a short period of time. It saw over 300 internal properties in Withall flooded internally, and they're nowhere near a river, really. And it was all down to excessive surface water and the huge amount of rain. And I think, really, I suppose, maybe I can help with that induction course, really, because the first thing you're going to need is waders, wellies, waterproofs and caps. And a lot of energy, really, to be able to get out there. But to see residents, you know, many who didn't get back into their homes, it's a traumatic thing, internal flooding. It isn't something that's just finished in a couple of days when it stopped raining. You suffer the aftermath for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months even. You know, and many of the residents in Withall were elderly and didn't actually, unfortunately, get back into their homes. And so the importance of these small-scale schemes is really, really important. And the area that Emma refers to, Sycamore Drive, I don't know whether anybody recalls seeing the photographs of it, but there were cars were over the roof in the bottom and basically gone straight through all of the houses there. And I think the situation with these holding ponds is critically important. It's about the financial viability of the schemes. We want to do more, but it's how much water can you hold back. But the difference, we had a recent storm not many months ago where we had a similar level of rainfall, but it stopped. But we'd already done mitigation measures. So these small schemes can make a huge impact because they can be the difference between flooding or not flooding. So I'm delighted to second the report. I think there's a lot of very good things in it. Ditches, I mean, I've got a resident already emailing me about gullies today. The problem is when you have a big storm like that, we're suddenly faced with a tsunami of gullies and drains that we've got to go out and empty. You know, and you've got staff, it's like gritting and having snowplows, isn't it, really? You've got to go out and do all of that work in a very short period of time. You can't really afford to have all of those resources available, so it's a critical element. And within Withall, there's riparian ownership of all of the brook that runs down. So if one person doesn't maintain it, that can be a huge problem area for the whole of the division. But absolutely delighted to second this. I think it's a really good step in the right direction, and it's a question of using money well and how we assess the financial viability of proposed schemes and how we fund them going forward is something there. But I've also like to say thanks to North Worcestershire Water Management as well for the work that they've done in terms of the technical advice in some of those small schemes that really helps you to understand the viability. But more than delighted to second this.
We've got a range of speakers, so I'll bring them all in one by one. We've got David next.
Thank you, Leader. Firstly, just to thank Alistair and Emma for this report. As the member for Tenbury Wells, I know a little about flooding and what have you. These small localised flood schemes are so important, and I just want to mention one which was done last year in Tenbury Wells. We all know that Tenbury floods, and it floods primarily from the River Teme. But also, adjoining the main Team Street is Market Street. And Market Street floods separately from excess rainfall and the rise of the water table. And it floods to such an extent that the shops in that area literally are flooded even when the River Team doesn't burst its banks. So I spoke to officers from the County Council the beginning of last year and said, look, is there anything that you can do? So they came out and they said, well, this isn't something we do, but let's have a think about it. So to cut a very long story short, right at the side of Keir Brook, which one or two of you will be aware of Keir Brook by now, they decided to dig out a sump in the footpath and to install a pump into the sump, and then they would then have a pipe which would be manually implemented when it was needed to pop it over the wall, and then the excess water would come from the highway, go over the wall and into Keir Brook. Brilliant. So that was all installed last year, and everyone in Tenbury Wells was very happy and very thankful to Worcestershire County Council. That is until the wall collapsed, and you all saw the photographs of that just before Christmas. Now, on a serious point, this was built by Worcestershire County Council for one reason and one reason only. The Environment Agency simply could not get their act together to build the main flood defence schemes over a period of 5 years. So rather than wait another year or 2 years or 3 years, this authority stepped in to help residents and businesses in that particular area. Unfortunately, there is no pump or sump anymore because it's all been washed away when that wall collapsed. So thank you to Worcestershire County Council for your help, support and what have you as a result of an incompetent Environment Agency. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, David. There's always challenges, as we know, on the bigger schemes, but examples of the small scale works we can do are always really good. Marcus, and then I've got Karen.
Yeah, thanks, Leader. I was going to be brief. I'll just echo the comments of others. Thank you to Alistair and his scrutiny panel's report, and indeed the Cabinet member Emma's response. And I think it's absolutely right that we can support small localised flood alleviation schemes. I represent a division of 2 halves, and one of the halves of that division is in the rural areas. And one thing that has been abundantly clear over the last few years is it does seem to be getting wetter, and we seem to be getting more rain, and there seems to be substantially more discharge of rainwater onto the highway. And I know that these schemes are to tackle the flooding of properties, but I am increasingly getting instances of water runoff into properties, particularly in the Drayton Chadsley area of my division, and so very much welcome the report in this area to see what we can do to tackle what is, I suspect, regrettably going to be an ever-increasing problem.
I absolutely agree. Karen.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks to Alistair and the team that did this scrutiny work. It's a really good piece of work, and thank you for interviewing me when I was at the Local Government Association conference in the side room with very bad connection, but thanks for hanging in there. We only Monday of this week had a meeting about the flooding issues we've got in Hagley, and when you're at the foot of the Clent Hills, you've got to create some small fixes, as Councillor Stokes said, to address this, and they make all the difference. Never underestimate that 5 minutes time you can buy in the long-term impact of a flood situation. I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank Matt McGuinness and Michael Green as well, because they're probably fed up to the back teeth and me keeps haranguing them and saying, could I have some help on this, please? Could you advise me on this? But But also, we don't say thank you often enough to our out-of-hours team, who now when I ring and they say, is that you, Karen? I say, yes, could you help me please? Because I'm in my wellies, I'm in the middle of the A456 and I've got gullies. So a special thanks to Kirk Waldron, and I don't know the other guy's name, it's gone completely out of my head this morning, but thanks very much to those out-of-hours teams. They won't know what a lifeline they've been to me at moments in time when I'm up to my knees in the proverbial thinking, how do I get out of this one? Thank you. Great piece of work. Thanks very much.
No, absolutely echo that, Karen, in terms of, because flooding, has no respect for hours of the day or hours of the night more often. So it's one of those things that people do go the extra mile and really pay tribute to them. Tony.
Thank you, Leader. Well, again, echoing the words of what have been said at this meeting. But what I would say is Councillor Emma Stokes needs all the support she can get when speaking with the Environment Agency and the other agencies that she works with. It is unacceptable that the amount of time that is wasted actually getting to the point of completion of a scheme when the Environment Agency can use local farmers with equipment in downtime to make the scheme more cost effective, as they could have in Tenbury Wells. And that this wasn't done, and it should be, and they should be held to account for that. So I support Emma and ask that she gets full support.
Yeah, I think I'd echo your comments, Tony, about obviously in terms of some of the bigger schemes, we're not in a position to deliver those. Never have been, never will be. But ultimately we have to work with our partners and we have to lobby effectively for the resources. But then they have to deliver for the communities of Worcestershire to actually fix those issues. They're a national agency. We're not able to do other people's jobs for them. So we rightly make those representations. But what this report is about, the ones we can fix and we can resolve, and we are putting more resources into that, because ultimately these small schemes, representing Riverside Division, I'm well aware of flooding on a regular basis, but I know it doesn't just affect our rivers and streams. It affects those locations. Sometimes people can get a property and never expect it to flood. It's well away from a watercourse, but because of that intense rainfall and maybe the lack of the drainage system to cope, or even Severn Trent's infrastructure many times, raw sewage or those kind of incidents. I've definitely seen those in my many years as leader, and ultimately they affect communities just the same. Really awful, and many months afterwards of actually the grief of trying to get their home back and get back their life back to normal. It's awful to see, and far too often are we seeing it. Emma, you might have this final word.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I really do appreciate the support of all the officers involved, all the scrutiny and all of the cabinet. Insofar as the work with the EA, as you quite rightly say, they are our partners and they do provide a vast amount of infrastructure to the local area. And I do sit on the RFCC and I wave the Worcestershire flag wherever I can, and repeatedly do so to the point of boredom. But I do pick up on the points that, these small issues, the Market Street was a brilliant example that helped a specific community in one street from a town that should flood from the river. However, this came from surface water and we managed it. This year it's been swept away, ironically, by a flood defence scheme. So these things happen, but the will, the desire and the capability of this council is absolutely noted amongst the local communities. Marcus has picked up on the fact that, the Drayton and Chaddesley area, and, it is going to be a repeated offence. These things are going to happen again and again. And if we can get some sort of scheme in place, some sort of idea, because believe me, your residents do know what the solution will be. They are aware of which field they will have to put a holding tank in to be able to, to protect some of the properties. So there's a lot of local intelligence, which is really what I referred to. The local intelligence is the area where you need to sort of gather this information. And flooding in Hagley, you know, again, it's the community safety side of things, Councillor May. You know, you're at the foot of the Clent Hills, as you say, and you stand on the A456, and you know, this water shouldn't invade the roads as frequently as it does. So we do need to sort of make sure that public safety is paramount in any of these flood events. But I thank you, the Cabinet, for all your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Alistair, in terms of all the work the panel's put in as well. Thank you, colleagues. It's been a very long session, probably a record Cabinet, actually. We're coming up to one, I think. But a very busy Cabinet and a lot of items to deal with. So thanks for all your engagement today.